We begin a quiet journey now, drifting gently through the annals of time to observe a life that unfolded amidst the vast, unpredictable expanse of the sea. It is a life marked by the rhythmic sway of ocean waves, the distant call of gulls, and the quiet hum of ambition beneath a canvas of sails. Our focus turns to Horatio Nelson, a name that echoes through the corridors of naval history, yet whose personal narrative, when viewed with a calm and steady gaze, reveals a tapestry woven with both the ordinary threads of human experience and the extraordinary pressures of an era defined by conflict. This is not a tale of bombast or hurried drama, but rather a reflective passage through the existence of a man who became over time an icon. We will trace his beginnings, a quiet birth in a Norfolk parsonage, far removed from the thundering broadsides that would later define his adult years. Our observation will extend through his formative moments, his early tentative steps into a maritime world, and the slow, deliberate shaping of his character against the backdrop of an evolving global power struggle. We will follow the arc of his career, from the youthful ventures on smaller vessels to the command of mighty ships of the line, pausing to note the subtle shifts in fortune and the persistent drive that propelled him forward. The significant engagements, the strategic decisions, and the personal costs of a life dedicated to service will be presented with a measured tranquility, allowing the facts to settle like the calm waters after a storm. Our journey will conclude with the final years, the ultimate sacrifice, and the enduring legacy that solidified his place in memory. Through it all, the intention is to provide a comprehensive yet soothing exploration, an opportunity to quietly absorb the contours of a remarkable existence, allowing the quiet narrative to unfold at its own unhurried pace. Let us drift now into the early chapters of Horatio Nelson's world, observing with a calm and steady eye. Our quiet observation now turns to the very beginnings, to the place where the life of Horatio Nelson first stirred. It was in the serene heart of Norfolk, a county in eastern England, that this future naval commander entered the world. More specifically, his birthplace was the small, unassuming village of Burnham Thorpe, a name that evokes the gentle murmur of the countryside rather than the roar of cannon fire. The year was 1758, a time when the rhythm of life in such rural corners moved with a quiet, unhurried pace. Imagine the landscape of 18th century Norfolk, a predominantly agricultural region, characterized by its wide, open skies and the gentle undulations of its terrain. Fields of grain would have stretched towards the horizon, punctuated by hedgerows that marked the boundaries of ancient farms. The air would have carried the scent of damp earth and growing things, a stark contrast to the salty tang of the open ocean. Burnham Thorpe itself was a modest parish, its community centred around the church and the parsonage, a place of quiet contemplation and simple routines. The rectory, where Nelson was born, was a comfortable but not grand dwelling, home to a clergyman and his growing family. Here, the sounds would have been those of domesticity, the gentle creak of floorboards, the rustle of pages, the distant lowing of cattle, and the soft chirping of birds from the surrounding trees. There would have been no hint within these peaceful walls of the tumultuous, adventurous destiny that awaited one of its youngest inhabitants. The nearest significant body of water, the North Sea, was some miles distant, its presence more a whisper on the wind than a tangible daily reality for a child growing up in the heart of the land. This tranquil pastoral setting provided the initial canvas for Nelson's existence. It was a world of green fields, winding country lanes, and the steady, predictable cycle of the seasons. Of this quietude stands in profound contrast to the eventual trajectory of his life, a life that would be largely spent far from the comforting stability of dry land, navigating tempestuous seas and the unpredictable currents of international conflict. The peaceful Norfolk landscape, therefore, serves as a poignant starting point, a calm before the great voyage. From the quiet fields of Burnham Thorpe, our gaze now turns to the individuals who shaped Horatio Nelson's earliest world, his parents and their respective family lines. His father was the Reverend Edmund Nelson, the rector of the parish. Edmund was a man of modest means, well educated, and deeply devoted to his clerical duties. His position as a country parson, though respectable, did not afford great wealth or influence. The daily reality of their household was one of careful management, stretched by the demands of a rapidly growing family. Horatio's mother was Catherine Nelson, near Suckling. It was through Catherine that a significant and ultimately pivotal connection to the sea entered the Nelson household. The Suckling family, unlike the Nelsons, possessed a notable lineage with strong ties to the Royal Navy. This branch of the family tree was not merely one of gentle landowners or local gentry. It was connected to the formidable world of maritime service and imperial ambition. Catherine was the daughter of Dr. Maurice Suckling, a prebendary of Westminster, and the niece of Captain Maurice Suckling, a distinguished officer in the Royal Navy. This Captain Maurice Suckling, a respected figure within naval circles, would become a crucial influence in young Horatio's life, a doorway to a destiny far removed from the Norfolk countryside. His presence in the family offered a tangible link to a world of ships, distant horizons, and the disciplined structure of naval command. The challenges of raising a large family on a clergyman's income were ever present. Catherine and Edmund would ultimately have 11 children, though not all survived to adulthood. This multitude of siblings meant a bustling, often demanding household where resources were carefully allocated. The early loss of several siblings, including Horatio's younger brother, would have instilled a certain stoicism and an understanding of life's fragility within the family unit. Despite these domestic realities, the presence of the Suckling naval heritage provided a subtle undercurrent of possibility. It offered an alternative to the quiet life of the church or the land. The stories of Captain Suckling's voyages, his command, and his experiences at sea would have resonated within the family home, perhaps sparking an early curiosity in young Horatio, even amidst the gentle routines of Burnham Thorpe. This blending of a scholarly, modest paternal line with a more adventurous, established maternal lineage laid the groundwork for the remarkable life that was to unfold. The early years of Horatio Nelson were marked not by robust health, but by a certain physical frailty. From a very young age, he was often described as delicate, prone to illness, and notably small in stature. This was a common experience for many children in the 18th century, a time when childhood mortality rates were high and medical understanding was still developing. Yet, for Nelson, these early physical challenges appear to have played a significant role in forging the unique qualities of his character. He was not the picture of a sturdy, boisterous country boy. Instead, his physical constitution seemed to demand a different kind of strength, an inner resolve. Rather than allowing his delicate health to foster timidity or weakness, it seems to have cultivated a powerful sense of determination and an almost fierce independence. This was a child who, despite his physical limitations, exhibited a remarkable spirit. Anecdotes from his childhood, though sometimes embellished by later biographers, consistently paint a picture of a boy who was unafraid to face adversity, even on a small scale. There are stories of him venturing out alone in harsh weather, driven by curiosity or a sense of duty, undeterred by the elements that might have sent a more robust child indoors. Such accounts, whether entirely literal or symbolic, suggest a boy who refused to be defined by his physical vulnerabilities. This early development of a strong will, perhaps compensating for his physical slightness, would prove to be a defining characteristic throughout his life. It was a determination that would later manifest as audacious courage in battle, an unwavering commitment to duty, and a refusal to acknowledge limitations. The physical self may have been delicate, but the spirit that animated it was anything but. His small physical frame also meant that he could not rely on brute strength or imposing presence. Instead, he would have learned, perhaps unconsciously, to cultivate other forms of influence, intellect, strategic thinking, and the power of conviction. These were the tools that would become far more potent than any physical attribute in his future career. Thus, the gentle boy from Norfolk, often touched by illness, began to develop the formidable inner fortitude that would one day command fleets and shape history. The formal education of Horatio Nelson began in the local grammar schools of Norfolk, institutions typical of the era that emphasized classical learning alongside moral and religious instruction. He attended the Royal Grammar School in Norwich for a time, and later the Paston School in North Walsham. These environments, though seemingly conventional, played a part in shaping the nascent character of the future admiral. The curriculum of such schools was rigorous, focusing on Latin, Greek, mathematics, and religious studies. While Nelson was not known as a particularly brilliant scholar in the traditional academic sense, these formative years instilled in him a foundational understanding of discipline and structure. He learned the value of methodical study and the importance of adherence to rules, principles that would later translate into his highly organized approach to naval command. Beyond the academic subjects, these schools, like most educational establishments of the time, were instrumental in imparting a specific set of values. Central among these were the concepts of duty, patriotism, and a profound sense of service to one's country. These were not merely abstract ideals, they were presented as the highest virtues a young man could aspire to, particularly within the context of Britain's growing global influence and maritime power. The spirit of the age was one of national pride and an expectation that gentlemen, and indeed all citizens, should contribute to the strength and welfare of the realm. For a boy like Nelson, coming from a family with connections to the Royal Navy, these values resonated deeply. The idea of service, of placing the needs of the nation above personal comfort or gain, became deeply ingrained. It was a moral compass that would guide his decisions throughout his life, often at great personal cost. His upbringing within a clergyman's household further reinforced these principles. His father, Edmund Nelson, a man of quiet integrity and strong moral conviction, undoubtedly modelled a life dedicated to service, albeit in a different sphere, and this domestic influence, combined with his schooling, cultivated a character marked by a serious approach to responsibility and an earnest desire to excel in whatever path he chose. These early lessons in duty and patriotism were not merely theoretical, they became the bedrock upon which his extraordinary naval career would be built, illuminating his path from a quiet Norfolk schoolboy to a national hero. The year 1771 marked a pivotal turning point in the quiet life of Horatio Nelson. At the tender age of 12, a decision was made that would forever alter his trajectory, pulling him from the gentle rhythms of rural Norfolk into the vast and often unforgiving expanse of the sea. It was the call of the Royal Navy, a destiny facilitated by the influential presence of his maternal uncle, Captain Maurice Suckling. Captain Suckling, as a distinguished officer in the Royal Navy, commanded the third-rate ship of the line, HMS Raisonnable. It was to this formidable vessel that young Horatio was appointed as a midshipman, though initially serving as a captain's servant. The arrangement was a common practice of the era, a way for boys with connections to enter the service and begin their long apprenticeship. For Nelson, it was an entry point into a world he'd only heard about in stories. This moment represented a profound and immediate shift from the familiar comforts and predictable routines of his childhood home. The peaceful, landlocked existence in Burnham Thorpe, surrounded by fields and the quiet solace of the rectory, was abruptly replaced by the confined, noisy and constantly moving environment of a warship, the air. Once filled with the scent of damp earth and blooming flora, was now heavy with the smell of tar, salt, and the close quarters of many men. Life at sea for a boy of 12 was immensely demanding. The transition from the sheltered care of his family to the harsh realities of naval discipline and the rigours of shipboard life required an extraordinary resilience. He would have been exposed to the full spectrum of maritime existence, the relentless motion of the waves, the unpredictable fury of storms, the strict hierarchy of command, and the constant threat of danger. The ship itself was a microcosm of a complex society, with its own rules, customs, and challenges. Nelson, despite his youth and slight build, had to quickly adapt to the physical demands, the communal living, and the often Spartan conditions. It was a world where self-reliance was paramount, and where every individual had a role to play in the functioning of the whole. This early immersion into the Royal Navy was not merely a change of scenery, it was a fundamental reorientation of his entire being. The sea became his new home, his school, and his crucible. It was here, amidst the creaking timbers and the vast horizons, that the foundations of his legendary career would truly begin to solidify, transforming the quiet boy into the burgeoning naval officer. The late 18th century was a transformative period for Great Britain, a time when the nation solidified its position as a burgeoning global power. Across the vast oceans its influence stretched, forming an intricate web of trade routes, colonies, and strategic outposts. This expansive reach was not accidental. It was meticulously built upon a foundation of naval supremacy, a testament to the nation's understanding that its destiny was inextricably linked to the sea. Britain's prosperity and security were directly tied to its maritime capabilities. Merchant ships laden with goods from distant lands navigated the world's waterways, bringing wealth and resources back to the home islands. To protect these vital arteries of commerce and to project power across the globe, a formidable navy was not merely an asset, it was an absolute necessity. The Royal Navy therefore became the very sinews of the empire, a symbol of national strength and a guardian against rival European powers. The social structures of 18th century Britain were intricately entwined with this maritime ambition. The aristocracy and landed gentry often saw naval service as a respectable and honourable path for their younger sons, offering opportunities for distinction and advancement. The officer corps, though diverse in its origins, often drew from these established families, instilling a sense of duty and loyalty to the crown and country. Beneath the officer ranks, a vast population of common men filled the ships. Life for these sailors was arduous, often involving impressment or voluntary enlistment driven by economic necessity or a thirst for adventure. Despite the harsh conditions, a unique culture developed within the Navy, characterised by camaraderie, strict discipline, and an unwavering commitment to the ship and its mission. The dockyards and port towns across Britain buzzed with activity, serving as vital hubs for the construction, repair, and provisioning of the fleet. Tens of thousands of skilled craftsmen, labourers, and merchants relied on the Navy for their livelihoods, creating a vast infrastructure that supported the nation's maritime endeavours. This intricate system of support, from the highest levels of government to the humblest dock worker, underscored the national commitment to naval power. This societal reliance on the Navy permeated national consciousness. Songs, stories, and public discourse often celebrated naval victories and the bravery of its sailors. The sea was not just a means of transport or defence, it was an integral part of the British identity, a source of pride and a defining characteristic of the nation's place in the world. For a young Horatio Nelson, entering this world meant stepping into the very heart of Britain's power and purpose, and entering the Royal Navy in the late 18th century was to step into a world of stark contrasts. a realm where immense potential for advancement coexisted with profound hardship. It was a complex institution, rigorously structured and demanding, yet it offered a unique path for individuals of talent and determination. At its core, the Navy operated on a strict, unyielding hierarchy. Every man had his place, from the admiral commanding a fleet down to the youngest powder monkey in the gun crew. Orders flowed downwards, and obedience was expected without question. This rigid structure was deemed essential for maintaining order and efficiency aboard a warship, where life itself could depend on swift and coordinated action. Discipline was not merely enforced, it was often brutal. Floggings and other harsh punishments were common, or used to maintain control and to deter insubordination in an environment that was inherently dangerous and confined. The conditions of life at sea were themselves a form of hardship: cramped quarters, monotonous diets, the constant threat of disease, and the ever-present danger of storms or enemy fire. Yet, within this demanding environment, the Royal Navy also presented a distinct world of opportunity. For those with aptitude, leadership qualities, and a willingness to learn, the path to promotion, though challenging, was open. Unlike some other avenues of society, sheer birthright alone did not guarantee success in the naval service. While patronage certainly played a significant role, particularly in securing initial appointments and early advancements, it was rarely enough on its own to sustain a long and distinguished career. Yet a captain's influence could indeed open doors, providing a young officer with valuable experience and a chance to prove himself. However, ultimately, a genuine display of skill, courage, and strategic acumen was paramount. An officer had to demonstrate a profound understanding of seamanship, navigation, and tactics. He needed to command the respect of his men, inspire loyalty, and make sound decisions under immense pressure. Successful naval careers were built not just on who one knew, but on what one could do. For a young man like Horatio Nelson, the Navy offered a crucible in which his innate abilities could be forged. The strictures of naval life, the constant learning, and the need to prove oneself in a competitive environment would shape his character and sharpen his intellect. It was a place where a quiet, determined individual, even one of modest means, could rise through the ranks, demonstrating that true merit, combined with the right connections, could lead to extraordinary achievements. This dual nature of the Royal Navy, its demanding discipline, and its potential for genuine advancement, would define the early trajectory of many lives, including Nelson's own. Nelson's early years at sea were marked by expeditions to the distant and challenging corners of the world, each voyage leaving an indelible impression on his developing character and naval skills. One notable experience was his participation in a scientific expedition to the Arctic in 1773. At the age of 15, he joined HMS Carcass, one of two ships attempting to find a navigable passage to India across the North Pole. This journey into the icy northern latitudes presented an entirely different set of challenges compared to the more conventional naval duties. The environment was unforgiving: vast expanses of ice, bitter cold, and the constant threat of the ships becoming trapped or crushed by the shifting flows. For a young man accustomed to the milder climate of Norfolk and the structured environment of a warship, this was an immersion in the raw power of nature. Nelson, despite his youth, displayed a keen sense of adventure and a nascent fearlessness during this expedition. A famous anecdote recounts his daring encounter with a polar bear, an event that, whether entirely accurate or somewhat embellished in later retellings, speaks to his developing courage and initiative. The Arctic voyage, though ultimately unsuccessful in its primary objective of finding a passage, was a profound lesson in endurance, the limits of human endeavour, and the humbling scale of the natural world. Following this frosty experience, Nelson's service took him to the opposite end of the climatic spectrum, the sweltering heat and unfamiliar diseases of the East Indies. In 1773 he transferred to HMS Seahorse, bound for the Indian Ocean. This posting was a common assignment for young officers seeking experience and promotion, but it came with its own severe trials. The long voyages to distant stations were arduous, testing the resilience of both ships and crew. Life in the East Indies was characterized by the oppressive humidity, the prevalence of tropical illnesses like malaria and dysentery, and the general enervation caused by the climate. Many European sailors succumbed to these diseases, and Nelson himself suffered a severe bout of an unspecified illness that nearly ended his life. This period underscored the harsh realities of distant naval service, where the enemy was often not another ship, but the unforgiving environment and the microscopic pathogens within it. The experience of illness and recovery would leave him with a lifelong fragility in his health, yet it also instilled a deeper understanding of human vulnerability and resilience. These early voyages, from the frozen north to the tropical east, served as a foundational education, exposing Nelson to the diverse hardships of naval life, and gradually shaping him into the tenacious and experienced officer he would become. Nelson's tenacity and the experience gained from his challenging early voyages contributed to a remarkably swift ascent through the naval ranks. His recovery from illness in the East Indies and subsequent return to England allowed for a period of recuperation, but his ambition remained undimmed. By 1777, at the age of 19, he passed his lieutenant's examination, a significant milestone that opened the door to independent command. His abilities were recognized, and within a year he was promoted to commander, taking charge of the brig HMS Badger. This rapid progression was not uncommon for talented young officers with influential connections, but Nelson's inherent skill and dedication were undeniable. His first significant command came in 1779 when he was made post-captain of the 28-gun frigate HMS Hinchinbroke. This appointment, at just 21 years old, placed him in a position of substantial responsibility. His initial service as captain largely centred on the Caribbean, a strategically vital region for the British Empire due to its lucrative sugar colonies. However, it was also a theatre of constant geopolitical tension and immense environmental challenges. The Caribbean was a crucible for British naval power, a place where the Royal Navy sought to assert and maintain authority against rival European powers, primarily France and Spain. This involved patrolling vast stretches of ocean, protecting trade routes, and participating in amphibious operations against enemy strongholds. For Nelson, this period was characterized by the relentless demands of command in a hostile climate. The tropical environment, with its intense heat and humidity, yet remained a formidable adversary. Sailors continued to fall victim to yellow fever, malaria, and other debilitating diseases, which often decimated crews more effectively than enemy cannon fire. The challenges of maintaining discipline and morale under such conditions, coupled with the logistical complexities of supplying ships far from home, were immense. Nelson's time in the Caribbean was not without direct military action. He participated in an expedition against San Juan in Nicaragua, a grueling and ultimately unsuccessful campaign that further exposed him to the devastating effects of tropical disease. While the military objectives were not fully realized, Nelson's personal conduct during these operations further solidified his reputation for courage and leadership, even in the face of adversity and high rates of sickness among his men. These experiences in the Caribbean, fraught with illness and the constant pressure of command in a distant and challenging theatre, further forged his character, deepening his understanding of both naval strategy and the human cost of empire. Following the American War of Independence, a new set of challenges emerged in the Caribbean, testing the resolve of British naval officers like Nelson. the newly independent United States, no longer bound by British mercantile laws, sought to continue trading freely with the British West Indies. However, the British government, through its Navigation Acts, aimed to protect its own colonial trade and shipping, prohibiting foreign vessels, including American ones, from trading directly with British colonies. This policy was deeply unpopular among the West Indian planters, who relied on American provisions and timber, often at lower prices than those offered by British merchants. Nelson, then commanding HMS Boreas, arrived in the Leeward Islands in 1784 and immediately confronted this complex situation. His instructions were clear: enforce the Navigation Acts with rigour. For Nelson, duty was paramount, and the law, as he understood it, was to be upheld without compromise. He observed numerous American vessels engaging in illicit trade, often with the tacit approval, or at least the turning of a blind eye, from local colonial officials and governors who sympathised with the planters' economic plight. Nelson's response was swift and uncompromising. He seized several American ships, and confiscating their cargoes and initiating legal proceedings against them in the colonial courts. This action, while entirely within the bounds of his orders and British law, provoked considerable resentment. Planters, merchants, and even some colonial administrators viewed his actions as excessively zealous and damaging to the local economy. He faced public outcry, legal challenges, and even threats of arrest for exceeding his authority, despite acting under direct naval instructions. His steadfast adherence to the law, even when it made him deeply unpopular, illuminated a core aspect of Nelson's character, an unwavering commitment to what he perceived as his duty to the Crown and the nation. He believed that the Navigation Acts were essential for the economic health and strategic security of the British Empire, and he would not waver in their enforcement, regardless of personal cost or local opposition. This period in the Caribbean, marked by legal battles and social friction, demonstrated Nelson's early principles: a rigid interpretation of orders, a profound sense of national loyalty, and an unyielding will to execute his responsibilities, even when it meant standing alone. It was an early indication of the profound sense of duty that would define his entire career. Amidst the professional challenges and legal disputes in the Caribbean, a more personal chapter began to unfold for Captain Nelson. While stationed in the Leeward Islands, he found himself drawn to the island of Nevis. There, he was introduced to Frances Nisbet, a young widow who resided with her uncle, John Herbert, the president of Nevis. Frances, often known as Fanny, was a quiet and gentle woman, already a mother to a young son, Josiah Nisbet, from her previous marriage. Their meeting was facilitated by Nelson's friend, Prince William Henry, the future King William IV, who was also serving in the West Indies at the time. The prince held a genuine affection for Nelson and frequently visited Nevis. It was through these social connections that Nelson and Frances became acquainted, slowly building a rapport that deepened over several months. Frances Nisbet, born in 1761, was 3 years younger than Nelson. Her life had already known both privilege and sorrow. She came from a prominent family on Nevis, but the loss of her first husband, Dr. Josiah Nisbet, had left her in a somewhat vulnerable position as a young widow with a small child. Nelson, for his part, was a driven naval officer, yet often immersed in his duties, yet he sought a quiet companionship and a stable home life, a common yearning for men whose profession often kept them at sea for extended periods. Their courtship progressed steadily, marked by the measured pace of colonial life. Nelson, despite his stern demeanour in enforcing the Navigation Acts, possessed a tender side, and he found in Frances a calm and supportive presence. She offered him a connection to domesticity, a stark contrast to the rigours of naval command and the often contentious environment of his professional life. On March 11, 1787, Horatio Nelson and Frances Nisbet were married on the island of Nevis. Prince William Henry himself gave the bride away, lending a touch of royal prestige to the ceremony. The event was a quiet affair, and a moment of personal joy amidst the broader complexities of Nelson's naval career. For Nelson, the marriage represented a hopeful beginning, an opportunity to establish a home and family, even as his professional life continued to call him to sea. He adopted Josiah as his stepson, showing a genuine paternal care for the boy. The newlywed couple harboured hopes for a peaceful domestic existence whenever Nelson was ashore. Frances, with her gentle disposition, seemed well suited to provide the quiet stability Nelson often craved but rarely experienced. Yet the demands of the Royal Navy were inexorable, and the rhythm of their life together would soon be dictated by the ebb and flow of national service and the distant call of the ocean. Following his marriage in the West Indies and the conclusion of his command of HMS Boreas, Captain Nelson returned to England in 1787. He brought with him not only his new wife, Frances, and stepson, Josiah, but also the lingering legal disputes stemming from his rigorous enforcement of the Navigation Acts. These legal challenges, while eventually resolved in his favour, cast a shadow over his immediate professional future. The period that followed was one of profound quietude for Nelson, a stark contrast to the relentless activity he had known since childhood. With the American War of Independence concluded and a fragile peace settled across Europe, the Royal Navy significantly reduced its active fleet. Many officers, including Nelson, found themselves placed on half pay, a reduced salary paid to officers not actively employed at sea. This was a common practice during peacetime, yet intended to retain experienced personnel without the full expense of maintaining a large standing navy. For a man of Nelson's temperament, accustomed to constant engagement and the purposeful rhythm of naval life, this forced inactivity was deeply unsettling. He yearned for the deck of a ship, the salt spray on his face, and the clear objectives of command. Instead, he found himself settled in Burnham Thorpe, Norfolk, in the rectory where his father still resided. The quiet routines of rural life, while offering a peaceful domesticity with Frances, could not fully satisfy his restless spirit. He occupied his time with gardening, fishing, and reading, attempting to find contentment in these terrestrial pursuits. Yet, his letters from this period reveal a growing sense of frustration and professional melancholy. He frequently expressed his desire to return to active service, lamenting the absence of a command. The half-pay, while providing a degree of financial security, felt like an acknowledgement of his professional irrelevance in the eyes of the Admiralty, a perception deeply wounding to his proud and ambitious nature. Nelson felt overlooked, his recent achievements in the Caribbean seemingly forgotten in the scramble for peacetime appointments. He wrote to friends and influential figures, seeking any opportunity for a ship, any chance to escape the perceived stagnation of life ashore. He believed his talents were being wasted, his potential unfulfilled, while others, perhaps less capable, secured commands. This extended period of waiting, which stretched for nearly 5 years, tested his patience and resolve. It fostered a deep-seated determination to prove his worth once more, to reassert his place within the naval hierarchy, and to demonstrate his unwavering commitment to his country should the opportunity ever arise again. The quiet frustration simmered beneath the surface of his calm domestic life, awaiting the moment when Europe's political climate would once again demand the service of its most capable officers. While Horatio Nelson navigated the quiet frustrations of half-pay in rural Norfolk, a profound and seismic shift was beginning to convulse the European continent. In the summer of 1789, distant thunder rolled from France, signalling the onset of a revolution that would reshape the very fabric of monarchical power and international relations. The storming of the Bastille on July 14th marked a symbolic beginning, yet few at the time could truly grasp the immense and far-reaching consequences that would unfold over the coming years. Initially, the events in France were viewed by some in Britain with a degree of detached curiosity, even a cautious optimism that a more liberal monarchy might emerge. However, as the revolution deepened, its character grew increasingly radical. The initial calls for constitutional reform gave way to more extreme demands, culminating in the abolition of the monarchy, the establishment of a republic, and the execution of King Louis XVI and Queen Marie Antoinette in 1793. These acts sent shockwaves across the monarchical states of Europe, including Great Britain. The escalating radicalism within France generated deep unease and fear among the established powers. The revolutionary government, era driven by fervent ideological zeal, began to export its ideas beyond its borders, challenging the traditional order and inspiring republican sentiments in other nations. This ideological fervour, coupled with aggressive military expansionism, transformed what began as an internal French affair into a continent-wide conflict. For Great Britain, the implications were immense. The rise of a powerful, unpredictable and ideologically driven French Republic posed an existential threat to its own monarchical system and its strategic interests. The long-standing rivalry between Britain and France, which had simmered for centuries, was reignited with a ferocity previously unseen. This new conflict would not merely be about colonial possessions or dynastic succession. It was a clash of ideologies, a struggle for the very future of Europe. This unfolding European turmoil, though initially distant from Nelson's quiet existence in Norfolk, would ultimately provide the catalyst for his return to active service. The demands of a burgeoning global conflict, requiring a strong and capable navy, would inevitably draw men of talent and experience back into the fray. The French Revolution, with its promise of chaos and widespread war, was the very event that would lift Nelson from his professional stagnation, launching him onto the grand stage of European history and setting the course for his legendary career. The quiet interlude was nearing its end, replaced by the impending roar of cannons and the vast expanse of the open sea. The escalating radicalism of the French Revolution, which had been reverberating across Europe, eventually compelled Great Britain to abandon its initial stance of cautious observation. The execution of King Louis XVI in January 1793, a regicidal act that shocked the monarchical world, was a pivotal moment. This, combined with France's aggressive expansionist policies into the Low Countries and its declaration of war against the Dutch Republic and Great Britain on February 1st, 1793, left the British government with no other recourse. The long peace, which had seen Nelson languish on half pay, abruptly ended. Britain's entry into the war was not undertaken lightly. The Prime Minister, William Pitt the Younger, had initially sought to avoid entanglement in continental affairs, focusing instead on financial stability and domestic reform. However, the revolutionary government in Paris made neutrality untenable. Their disregard for international treaties, their open hostility towards monarchies, and their direct threats to British commercial interests in the Scheldt estuary left London with a stark choice: either defend its interests in the European balance of power or risk isolation and the potential spread of revolutionary fervour to its own shores. Thus, in 1793, Great Britain formally joined the First Coalition against revolutionary France. This marked the beginning of a quarter-century of intermittent but intensely fought conflicts, often referred to as the French Revolutionary and later the Napoleonic Wars. These were not merely conventional wars of territorial acquisition. They were ideological struggles pitting the established monarchical order against the dynamic, often chaotic, forces of French republicanism and nationalism. For the Royal Navy, Britain's entry into this conflict signalled a renewed purpose and an immediate demand for ships and experienced officers. The years of peacetime reductions were suddenly reversed, and the docks and shipyards buzzed with activity. The fleet, which had been the silent guardian of British interests, was now called upon to confront a formidable and ideologically driven adversary across the Channel and on distant seas. This renewed state of war provided the long-awaited opportunity for many officers, including Captain Horatio Nelson, to return to active service. The strategic imperative to contain French expansion, protect vital trade routes, and project British power globally meant that every available ship and every capable commander would be needed. The stage was now set for the major naval campaigns and engagements that would not only define the course of these wars, but also forge Nelson's enduring legend as one of history's greatest admirals. The quiet waiting was over. The time for action had finally arrived. With the declaration of war in February 1793, the long period of enforced idleness for Captain Horatio Nelson drew to a close. The Royal Navy, expanding rapidly to meet the demands of the conflict, began to recall its experienced officers to active service. For Nelson, this summons was a deeply welcome relief after 5 years of professional frustration and the quiet anxieties of half pay. His ardent desire to serve, which had been a constant undercurrent throughout his life, could now find its outlet once more. In January 1793, even before Britain formally entered the war, Nelson received orders that would decisively alter his trajectory. He was appointed to command the 64-gun ship of the line, HMS Agamemnon, a vessel that would become deeply associated with his early wartime successes. This was a significant command, offering him the opportunity to demonstrate his capabilities on a larger stage than his previous frigate assignments. The Agamemnon was a new ship, considered a fast and well-built vessel of her class, and Nelson took great pride in preparing her for sea. His destination was the Mediterranean, a theatre of immense strategic importance in the unfolding conflict. Control of the Mediterranean Sea was crucial for projecting power into southern France, supporting Allied nations and protecting British trade routes to the east. The French, with their major naval base at Toulon, posed a significant threat to British dominance in the region. Nelson's new assignment placed him under the command of Vice Admiral Lord Hood, one of Britain's most distinguished and experienced naval commanders. Hood, a figure of considerable authority and tactical acumen, was tasked with establishing British supremacy in the Mediterranean. His fleet was formidable, comprising many ships of the line and frigates, and was intended to challenge French naval power directly. Joining Hood's fleet in the Mediterranean marked Nelson's return to the active heart of naval operations. The quiet domesticity and professional stagnation of his years ashore were now firmly behind him. He was once again at sea, immersed in the routines and challenges of command, surrounded by the vastness of the ocean and the ever-present anticipation of encounter. This assignment was not merely a return to duty, it was a re-entry into the crucible of war where his unique blend of courage, tactical insight, and relentless drive would soon begin to distinguish him among his peers. The stage was set for the next significant chapter in his unfolding career. Upon arriving in the Mediterranean, Captain Nelson and HMS Agamemnon were almost immediately drawn into the unfolding drama of the Siege of Toulon in August 1793. Toulon, a vital French naval base, had declared itself against the radical Jacobin government, inviting Anglo-Spanish forces to occupy the city and protect its fleet. This presented Lord Hood with an extraordinary opportunity to neutralise a significant portion of the French fleet and secure a crucial strategic foothold. Nelson's role during the siege was initially varied, reflecting the diverse demands of naval operations supporting a land campaign. The Agamemnon was employed in blockading duties, preventing supplies and reinforcements from reaching the besieging French Republican forces. Nelson also directed smaller boats and landing parties, engaged in skirmishes with shore batteries, and ferried messages and personnel between the various Allied units. These tasks, though seemingly minor, required constant vigilance, sound judgment, and a willingness to take calculated risks. It was during this period that Nelson began to demonstrate the distinctive qualities of leadership that would later define him. He was not content to merely follow orders. He actively sought opportunities to contribute beyond the strict confines of his command. His ship was often positioned closer to the shore than others, enduring heavier fire as Nelson believed in pressing the attack and gathering intelligence directly. He displayed an almost instinctive understanding of the battlefield, keenly observing the enemy's movements and anticipating their actions. One particular incident during the siege highlighted his initiative. While leading a small squadron tasked with protecting the Allied flanks and disrupting French communications, Nelson encountered a French convoy. Disregarding the conventional caution of engaging shore batteries, he pressed his attack with characteristic boldness, capturing several vessels and inflicting damage on the enemy. This act, though not a major battle, showcased his readiness to act decisively and take personal responsibility for aggressive action, even when operating somewhat independently. His courage was also evident. Nelson was frequently exposed to enemy fire, often placing himself in positions of danger to observe the situation firsthand or to rally his men. This personal bravery, combined with his evident tactical intelligence, began to earn him the respect of his superiors and the unwavering loyalty of his crew. Although Toulon ultimately fell to the French in December 1793, due in part to the brilliant artillery tactics of a young Napoleon Bonaparte, Nelson's performance during the siege marked him as an officer of exceptional promise. It was an early, quiet affirmation that here was a commander who thought beyond the rigid conventions, ready to seize the moment with a unique blend of audacity and calculated resolve. Following the withdrawal from Toulon, the focus of British operations in the Mediterranean shifted towards Corsica. With this large island, strategically positioned, was a hotbed of French Republican sentiment and a critical base for their naval operations. Lord Hood resolved to secure it, aiming to deny the French its resources and provide the British with a forward operating base. Nelson, with HMS Agamemnon, played a central role in this campaign, which primarily involved a series of arduous land sieges supported by naval power. The campaign in Corsica was characterized by its demanding nature. Nelson's ship, the Agamemnon, was often stripped of its sailors and marines, who were sent ashore to augment the small land forces. Nelson himself frequently commanded these landing parties, often leading them in the construction of batteries and the movement of heavy artillery over rugged terrain. It was a departure from conventional naval warfare, requiring adaptability, engineering skill, and relentless physical exertion. One of the most significant engagements was the Siege of Calvi in the summer of 1794. Calvi was a strongly fortified port, defended by determined French garrisons. The siege was protracted and arduous, conducted under the scorching Mediterranean sun, with widespread disease afflicting both sides. Nelson, leading a detachment of sailors and marines, established shore batteries and directed their fire against the fortifications. His presence on land was constant, his energy seemingly inexhaustible, inspiring his men through sheer example. It was during the final stages of the Siege of Calvi in July 1794 that Nelson sustained a severe injury. While directing the fire of a battery, a French shot struck the ground near him, sending fragments of sand and gravel into his face. His right eye was particularly affected. Initially, the extent of the damage was not fully clear, but it soon became apparent that the vision in that eye was permanently lost. The injury caused him considerable pain and discomfort, and for a time, there was concern for his overall recovery. Despite the profound impact of this wound, Nelson exhibited remarkable resilience. He continued to oversee the operations at Calvi, refusing to be evacuated or to retreat from his duties. His dedication remained unwavering, even as his vision was irrevocably altered. The loss of an eye was a tangible mark of his commitment to the service, a physical manifestation of the sacrifices demanded by war. It did not diminish his drive or his strategic acumen. Instead, it became a part of the legend that was quietly beginning to form around him, a testament to his enduring spirit in the face of adversity. The year 1797 brought a new set of challenges and opportunities for the British fleet in the Mediterranean. Spain, having allied with France, now posed a significant naval threat, and their combined forces aimed to challenge British supremacy. It was against this backdrop that the British fleet, under the command of Admiral Sir John Jervis, encountered the Spanish fleet off Cape St. Vincent on the southwestern coast of Portugal. On the morning of February 14th, 1797, a thick fog gradually lifted to reveal the Spanish fleet, significantly outnumbering the British. The Spanish had 27 ships of the line, while Jervis commanded only 15. Despite the numerical disadvantage, Jervis resolved to engage. His plan was to sail his fleet in a single line, cutting through the disorganized Spanish formation and preventing their ships from consolidating into a coherent fighting force. Nelson, now a commodore, commanded HMS Captain, a 74-gun ship of the line positioned towards the rear of the British column. As the British line began to execute Jervis's plan, a critical moment arose. The leading Spanish ships, attempting to escape the British manoeuvre and rejoin the main body of their fleet, began to turn away. If they succeeded, a substantial portion of the Spanish fleet might escape engagement, and Jervis's carefully planned advantage would be lost. It was at this juncture that Nelson made a decision that would define his early career and solidify his reputation for audacious initiative. Observing the Spanish movement and recognizing the imminent danger to the British plan, he did not hesitate. Without waiting for orders from Jervis, and in direct contravention of the established line of battle, Nelson abruptly turned HMS Captain out of the British column. He steered his ship directly towards the leading Spanish vessels, aiming to cut them off and prevent their escape. This bold, unauthorized maneuver was fraught with risk. Breaking the line of battle was a grave offence, potentially leading to court-martial if it failed. Yet Nelson's instinct proved correct. His decisive action brought HMS Captain into immediate and intense engagement with several much larger Spanish ships, including the 112-gun San Nicolas and the massive 130-gun Santísima Trinidad. The fight was fierce, with HMS Captain sustaining heavy damage. Nelson's audacious move, however, was not only successful in preventing the Spanish escape, but also galvanized other British ships to follow his lead. The timely arrival of Captain Collingwood's Excellent provided crucial support, and together, Nelson and Collingwood engaged the Spanish ships with relentless aggression. In a remarkable display of close-quarters fighting, Nelson personally led boarding parties from the Captain onto the San Nicolas, capturing her. From the deck of the San Nicolas, he then led another boarding party onto the San Jose, securing a second Spanish prize. The Battle of Cape St. Vincent was a decisive British victory, with 4 Spanish ships captured. Nelson's unconventional and daring actions were crucial to this success. Jervis, far from reprimanding Nelson, publicly praised his initiative, and recognizing the extraordinary bravery and strategic insight that had saved the day. The victory brought Nelson national recognition and rapid promotion to Rear Admiral, confirming his status as a rising star within the Royal Navy. The audacious turnout of the line at Cape St. Vincent was merely the prelude to an even more extraordinary display of Nelson's tactical ingenuity and personal courage. As HMS Captain found itself locked in a brutal exchange with the 112-gun Spanish ship San Nicolas, the two vessels drifted into close proximity. The fierce cannonade had taken a heavy toll on HMS Captain, her rigging shredded, her hull battered. Conventional naval doctrine would have dictated a period of disengagement to assess damage and prepare for another broadside. However, Nelson envisioned a different, more direct path to victory. Observing the San Nicolas now entangled with his own damaged ship, Nelson saw an opportunity for a decisive strike. He famously called to his men, "Westminster Abbey or glorious victory," and ordered his marines and sailors to prepare for boarding. This was a direct, frontal assault, an act of sheer will against a formidable opponent. What followed was a manoeuvre that would become legendary, dubbed by Nelson himself as his patent bridge for boarding. With remarkable speed, Nelson led his men across the gap between the two ships. The initial boarding party, composed of grenadiers and other determined sailors, swarmed over the bulwarks of the San Nicolas. The fighting on the Spanish deck was hand-to-hand, brutal and close quarters, a stark contrast to the distant cannonades of earlier engagement. Nelson, ever at the forefront, was among the first to step onto the enemy deck, his cutlass drawn. His personal presence and fearless example inspired his men to fight with renewed ferocity. The Spanish crew, demoralized by the relentless British assault and surprised by the directness of the attack, quickly began to yield. Within a short span the San Nicolas was secured, her colours struck. But Nelson's tactical vision extended beyond merely capturing one ship. From the deck of the newly captured San Nicolas, he observed an even larger prize within reach. The massive 80-gun San Jose, which had been attempting to come to the aid of the San Nicolas, and had subsequently become entangled with her. Without a moment's hesitation, Nelson ordered his men to continue their assault. Using the captured San Nicolas as a literal bridge, he and his boarding party streamed across her deck and onto the San Jose. This was the patent bridge in its fullest manifestation, using one captured enemy ship as a platform to assault another. The surprise and audacity of this second boarding overwhelmed the crew of the San Jose. Her resistance crumbled swiftly, and she too was taken. This double capture, executed with such daring and unorthodox methods, showcased Nelson's exceptional tactical mind. It demonstrated his ability to think unconventionally under pressure, to seize fleeting opportunities, and to inspire his men through personal bravery. This extraordinary feat at Cape St. Vincent cemented his reputation not just as a competent officer, but as a truly innovative and fearless naval commander, capable of turning the tide of battle through sheer force of will and brilliant improvisation. Following the triumphs at Cape St. Vincent, Nelson's reputation soared, but his relentless pursuit of enemy forces would soon lead him to a severe personal trial. In July of 1797, Vice Admiral Sir Horatio Nelson was dispatched to attack Santa Cruz de Tenerife, a Spanish port in the Canary Islands. The objective was to capture a treasure ship rumoured to be harboured there, and to inflict a strategic blow against Spanish interests. However, the expedition would prove to be one of the most disastrous of his career. The plan involved a night assault by landing parties intended to surprise the Spanish garrison. Nelson, ever at the forefront, personally led one of the storming parties. The approach to the shore was fraught with difficulty. A strong current scattered the landing boats, and the element of surprise was lost. As Nelson stepped ashore in the darkness, amidst the confusion and the opening volleys of musket fire from the Spanish defenders, he was struck. A grape shot from a Spanish cannon ripped through his right arm just above the elbow. The wound was immediately agonizing and severe. Nelson fell, bleeding profusely, but his indomitable spirit remained. Despite the immense pain, he refused to be carried away until he had given orders for the retreat of his men, recognizing the futility of continuing the attack under such circumstances. He was then carefully borne back to his boat and rowed to HMS Theseus, where the ship's surgeon awaited. On board the Theseus, the grim reality of the injury became clear. The arm was shattered beyond repair, necessitating an immediate amputation. The procedure, performed without anesthesia, was a brutal ordeal, a testament to Nelson's extraordinary resilience. He endured it with a stoicism that astonished those around him, maintaining his composure even as a part of his body was irrevocably severed. The physical toll of this injury was profound. Nelson had already lost the sight of one eye at Calvi, and now he had lost his dominant arm. Simple tasks became arduous, and the constant phantom pains and discomfort would plague him for the rest of his life. Yet, the psychological impact, though significant, did not break his spirit. Instead, it seemed to harden his resolve. He felt the sting of defeat at Tenerife deeply, not only for the loss of his arm but for the failure of the mission itself. This rare setback, however, only intensified his desire for future victories, to prove that his physical incapacities did not diminish his capacity for command. The loss of his arm served as a stark, visible reminder of the sacrifices demanded by war. Yet it would never dim the fire of his ambition or his unwavering dedication to the service of his country. The initial period following the amputation of Nelson's arm was one of intense pain and slow, arduous recovery. He was transported back to England, arriving in Portsmouth in September 1797. The journey itself was a test of endurance, with the wound still fresh and susceptible to infection. Upon his return, he sought medical care and rest in Bath, a city renowned for its healing waters and tranquil atmosphere. Here, away from the immediate clamour of naval life, he began the process of adjusting to his new physical reality. The loss of his right arm, his sword arm, was a profound alteration to his being. He had to learn to write with his left hand, a task that initially proved frustrating and cumbersome for a man accustomed to swift action and decisive command. The phantom limb pain, a common consequence of amputation, was a constant, unsettling companion, a ghostly echo of the limb that was no more. Yet, even in this period of personal struggle, Nelson's fundamental character remained unchanged. He refused to succumb to despondency, instead focusing his formidable will on adapting and overcoming. While Nelson was grappling with his personal recovery, news of his exploits had reached the British public. The story of his audacious actions at Cape St. Vincent, where he had boarded 2 Spanish ships, followed by the dramatic account of his injury at Tenerife, began to circulate widely. Newspapers and pamphlets recounted his bravery, his tactical genius, and his willingness to sacrifice himself for the nation. He was no longer merely a distinguished naval officer. He was becoming a symbol, a figure of extraordinary heroism. The public imagination was captivated by this officer who had literally given parts of his body to the service of his country. His missing eye and now his missing arm were not seen as weaknesses, but as badges of honour, tangible proof of his unparalleled courage and dedication. He embodied the spirit of British defiance against the formidable power of revolutionary France and its allies. His return to England was met with growing acclaim. Though initially a private struggle, his injuries elevated him in the public consciousness. He received a pension for his wounds and was invested as a Knight of the Bath, an honour that acknowledged his distinguished service. These accolades were not merely official recognitions. They reflected a burgeoning national pride in Nelson, a quiet admiration for the sacrifices he had made. He was seen as a living testament to British naval supremacy and individual valour, a figure around whom national hopes could coalesce. even as he quietly recuperated and prepared for his inevitable return to the sea. The nation watched, expectant, as this wounded hero healed, knowing his spirit remained unbroken. By 1798, the strategic landscape of the Mediterranean was once again shifting, drawing Britain's attention with renewed urgency. France, and under the ambitious leadership of Napoleon Bonaparte, was embarking on an audacious venture, an expedition to Egypt. The true aim of this grand undertaking was shrouded in secrecy, but its potential implications were clear. Control of Egypt would provide France with a foothold in the east, threatening British trade routes to India and potentially disrupting the delicate balance of power across the globe. The British Admiralty, recognising the immense danger posed by this French enterprise, entrusted Vice Admiral Nelson with a vital, yet immensely challenging mission. He was ordered to sail into the Mediterranean, locate Bonaparte's fleet, and if possible, destroy it. This was a task of unparalleled difficulty. The Mediterranean, though an enclosed sea, was vast and complex, filled with numerous islands, intricate coastlines, and often unpredictable weather patterns. Locating a large fleet moving under strict orders of secrecy within such an expanse was akin to searching for a small object in an enormous, shifting landscape. Nelson's squadron, though well equipped, faced considerable logistical hurdles. Supply lines were long and vulnerable, and the need for fresh water and provisions was constant. The French fleet, by contrast, had the advantage of departing from Toulon, a well-supplied port, and initially had a clear objective, even if that objective was unknown to the British. The pursuit began with a sense of urgent uncertainty. Nelson had to rely on fragmented intelligence, educated guesses, and his own profound understanding of naval strategy and human nature. He surmised that Bonaparte's destination was likely somewhere in the eastern Mediterranean, but the exact course and ultimate objective remained elusive. This led to a relentless, almost desperate chase across thousands of miles of open water. His ship sailed eastward, scanning the horizon, enduring the heat of the Mediterranean summer, and constantly battling the anxieties of an unseen enemy. They passed by Sardinia, then Sicily, always pushing further, always searching. The strategic importance of intercepting Bonaparte was paramount, for the consequences of his success in Egypt could be catastrophic for British imperial interests. Nelson's pursuit was not just a naval operation, it was a race against time and an exercise in strategic intuition, a testament to the immense pressures and uncertainties that defined naval warfare in this era. The vastness of the sea became both a canvas for his determination and a formidable adversary in itself. After weeks of relentless searching, the British fleet at last sighted their elusive quarry on August 1st, 1798. The French fleet, under the command of Vice Admiral Brueys, lay at anchor in Aboukir Bay, near the mouth of the Nile. Their position appeared formidable, drawn up in a long line, their bows facing seaward, seemingly protected by shoals and the shallow waters of the bay. The French believed their position was impregnable, with the land offering a natural barrier to one flank. However, Nelson, with his characteristic audacity and keen eye for tactical advantage, saw not a barrier but an opportunity. He immediately conceived a plan that was both brilliant and daring. Instead of engaging the French line from the seaward side only, he intended to send a portion of his fleet between the French ships and the shore. This would effectively double-team the enemy, attacking them from both sides and trapping them against the land. It was a manoeuvre that conventional naval doctrine would have deemed too risky, as it required navigating unknown shallow waters in the fading light of day. As the British ships approached, the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the tranquil waters of the bay. Without hesitation, the first British ships led by Captain Foley in HMS Goliath bravely threaded their way into the uncharted passage between the French vanguard and the shore. Other ships followed, carefully sounding the depths as they advanced, a testament to the discipline and training Nelson had instilled in his captains. The battle commenced with a thunderous roar of cannon fire echoing across the bay. The French, caught by surprise by the attack from both flanks, found themselves in a desperate struggle. Their ships, anchored and unable to manoeuvre freely, became stationary targets. The concentrated fire from the British vessels, now engaging from both sides, was devastating. The close-quarters engagement was fierce, lasting through the night. The flagship of Admiral Brueys, the majestic L'Orient, became a focal point of the battle. Engaged by several British ships, she suffered immense damage, her decks ravaged by shot and shell. In the darkness, around 10 o'clock that evening, a catastrophic explosion rocked the bay as L'Orient's magazine ignited, sending a towering column of flame and debris into the night sky. The concussive blast momentarily silenced the guns, and the burning wreckage illuminated the horrific scene. The explosion of L'Orient marked a turning point, though the fighting continued for hours. By dawn, the scale of the British victory was clear. The French fleet was annihilated, with 11 of their 13 ships of the line either captured or destroyed. Only 2 French ships and 2 frigates managed to escape. The Battle of the Nile was not merely a victory, it was a devastating blow to French power in the Mediterranean, effectively stranding Bonaparte's army in Egypt and securing British naval supremacy. The overwhelming success at Aboukir Bay was a direct consequence of Nelson's exceptional tactical foresight and his captain's unwavering adherence to his strategic vision. The French, under Admiral Brueys, had anchored their fleet in a strong defensive line, believing the shallow waters and shoals to their port side offered impenetrable protection. They had not anticipated a commander who would challenge such conventional wisdom. Nelson's genius lay in recognizing that this perceived strength could, in fact, be turned into a profound weakness. His decision to attack the French from both sides, particularly sending ships between the French line and the shore, was a calculated risk that paid immense dividends. This manoeuvre, audacious in its conception, required precise navigation and an intimate understanding of each ship's capabilities. It demonstrated Nelson's deep trust in his captains, who, through years of serving under him, had internalized his aggressive fighting philosophy and understood his intentions without the need for intricate signals. This shared understanding, often referred to as the Nelson touch, allowed for remarkable flexibility and initiative in the heat of battle. The execution of this plan was flawless. The leading British ships, notably the Goliath and Zealous, bravely navigated the uncharted shallow waters, positioning themselves to rake the French bows and sterns where they were most vulnerable. By concentrating their fire on the leading French ships, the British effectively isolated and overwhelmed individual vessels before the rest of the French line could offer significant support. This tactic of doubling the enemy, bringing superior firepower to bear on specific points of the French line, systematically dismantled their defences. The relentless British assault delivered from both sides created an unbearable pressure on the French. Their ships, unable to manoeuvre or bring all their guns to bear effectively, were reduced to static targets. The destructive power of the British broadsides, coupled with the psychological impact of being attacked from an unexpected quarter, quickly broke French resistance. The loss of their flagship, L'Orient, in a spectacular explosion not only removed their commander, but also shattered the morale of the remaining French crews. This decisive victory at the Nile had far-reaching strategic consequences. It was not merely a naval triumph, it was a geopolitical earthquake. By annihilating the French fleet, Nelson had effectively severed Napoleon Bonaparte's army in Egypt from France. Without naval support and supply lines, Bonaparte's grand designs for an Eastern Empire were irrevocably undermined. The battle reasserted British naval dominance in the Mediterranean, influencing the course of the wider conflict and bolstering the spirit of the Second Coalition against revolutionary France. It was a testament to a commander who dared defy convention, turning perceived weakness into an instrument of absolute victory. The immediate aftermath of the Battle of the Nile presented a scene of profound destruction and a stark testament to the ferocity of the engagement. Of the 13 French ships of the line, 9 were captured and 2 were utterly destroyed, including the immense flagship L'Orient. Only 2 French ships of the line and 2 frigates managed to escape the bay, a mere fraction of the powerful fleet that had once anchored with such confidence. The human cost was equally staggering. Thousands of French sailors were killed and wounded or captured, while the British losses, though significant, were comparatively light. The silence that followed the explosions and the cannonades was heavy, punctuated only by the groans of the wounded and the creaking of damaged timbers. News of this monumental victory rippled slowly across the globe, carried by swift packets and eager dispatches. When it reached London, the public jubilation was immense and widespread. Bells pealed from churches across the nation, bonfires were lit, and spontaneous celebrations erupted in towns and villages. The nation, which had endured years of conflict and uncertainty, found immense solace and renewed confidence in this decisive blow against its most formidable enemy. The Battle of the Nile was immediately recognised as one of the most significant naval victories in British history, a triumph that reshaped the geopolitical landscape. For Horatio Nelson, this victory cemented his status as a national hero, elevating him to an almost mythical figure in the popular imagination. Already celebrated for his bravery and tactical skill, the Nile transformed him into Britain's greatest living naval commander. Honours and accolades poured in from across Europe. The King of Naples, Ferdinand IV, bestowed upon him the title of Duke of Bronte, an estate in Sicily. More significantly, King George III elevated him to the peerage, creating him Baron Nelson of the Nile and of Burnham Thorpe. These titles were not merely ceremonial, they were tangible expressions of a nation's gratitude and admiration for a man who had delivered such a crucial victory. The global repercussions of the Battle of the Nile were immediate and far-reaching. In Napoleon Bonaparte's Egyptian campaign, once seen as a bold strategic stroke, was now effectively doomed. His army, cut off from resupply and reinforcement, was stranded in a hostile land. This unexpected turn of events invigorated the Second Coalition against France, inspiring Austria, Russia, and the Ottoman Empire to renew their efforts against the French Republic. The balance of power in the Mediterranean shifted dramatically, with British naval supremacy firmly re-established. The victory at Aboukir Bay was not just a battle won, it was a strategic turning point that profoundly influenced the subsequent years of the Napoleonic Wars, demonstrating the enduring power of naval might to dictate the course of continental conflict. Following the resounding triumph at the Battle of the Nile, the journey back to Britain was one of anticipation and growing acclaim for Horatio Nelson. The news of his victory had preceded him, turning his eventual arrival into a moment of national celebration. When his ship finally approached the shores of England, the reception he received was nothing short of rapturous. From the moment he stepped onto British soil, Nelson was met with an outpouring of public adoration and official recognition that few military figures in history have ever experienced. Crowds gathered wherever he went, eager to catch a glimpse of the man who had delivered such a decisive blow against the nation's adversary. The streets were often lined with cheering throngs, their voices rising in unison to welcome their hero. Flags waved, church bells rang, and spontaneous festivities erupted, were transforming his journey into a triumphal procession. The public had found in Nelson a symbol of British resilience and naval might, a figure whose courage and genius offered reassurance in turbulent times. His name was on every tongue, his image reproduced in countless prints and medallions, a testament to his pervasive popularity. Official recognition followed swiftly and impressively. The British government, representing a grateful nation, moved to bestow upon Nelson honours befitting his extraordinary achievement. The most significant of these was his elevation to the peerage. He was created Baron Nelson of the Nile and of Burnham Thorpe in the county of Norfolk. This title was not merely an acknowledgement of his military prowess, it was a permanent mark of national gratitude, securing his place within the highest echelons of British society. The specific mention of the Nile in his title ensured that his greatest victory would forever be etched into his identity and legacy. Beyond the peerage, various other accolades were showered upon him. Parliament voted him a substantial pension, ensuring his financial security for life. Cities across Britain conferred upon him the freedom of their corporations, a traditional honour that symbolised respect and gratitude. Swords of honour, decorative vases and gold medals were presented by numerous organisations and individuals, each item a tangible expression of the esteem in which he was held. Artists clamoured to paint his portrait, capturing the likeness of the man whose one eye and missing arm were now badges of honour, physical manifestations of his sacrifices for the nation. Nelson had become more than just a successful admiral. He had transformed into a national icon, a living legend. His name evoked courage, strategic brilliance, and an unwavering commitment to duty. This hero's welcome cemented his place in the hearts of the British people, setting a precedent for the kind of public veneration usually reserved for monarchs. He was not just a military leader, but a figure who embodied the spirit of the nation, a true hero of the age. Following the intense exertions and profound triumph of the Battle of the Nile, Nelson found himself in need of respite and repairs for his battle-worn flagship, the Vanguard. He sailed to Naples, a vibrant and politically complex port city, then the capital of the Kingdom of Naples and Sicily. His arrival there, in September of 1798, marked a significant turning point in his personal life, one that would ripple through the remainder of his days. It was in Naples that Nelson was introduced to Lady Emma Hamilton. She was the wife of Sir William Hamilton, the long-serving British ambassador to the Kingdom of Naples, a man of considerable intellect, an antiquarian, and a diplomat. Sir William, who was significantly older than his wife, had cultivated a reputation as a connoisseur and a respected figure in Neapolitan society. Lady Hamilton, however, was a figure of a very different character. Born Amy Lyon, she had risen from humble origins in the north of England. Her path to becoming Lady Hamilton had been unconventional, marked by a striking beauty, a spirited personality, and a remarkable talent for performance, particularly her attitudes, tableaux vivants that captivated audiences. She possessed a vivacity and charm that made her a prominent figure in the social circles of Naples. Her striking looks and magnetic presence were often the subject of admiration and discussion. When Nelson first met Lady Hamilton, he was still bearing the physical and emotional scars of his recent campaigns. He was physically diminished, having lost an arm, and his health was often precarious. Yet, his spirit remained indomitable, fueled by his recent victory and the national adulation that had followed. Lady Hamilton, for her part, was captivated by the hero of the Nile. Her admiration for him was immediate and effusive, a stark contrast to the often reserved nature of his own wife, Fanny, whom he'd left behind in England. Their initial meeting evolved into a deep connection. Lady Hamilton offered Nelson a warmth, an emotional understanding, and an effusive adoration that he had perhaps never fully experienced. She nursed him during periods of ill health, provided comfort, and offered an intellectual companionship that he found increasingly appealing. Sir William, for his part, seemed to view the burgeoning friendship with a degree of benign detachment, perhaps recognizing the profound impact Nelson's presence had on his wife, or perhaps simply accustomed to the complex dynamics of his own marriage and the social customs of the time. This burgeoning relationship between Nelson and Lady Emma Hamilton was, from its very inception, controversial. Nelson was a married man, a national hero, and a figure of immense public scrutiny. Lady Hamilton, though the wife of an ambassador, had a past that was known in certain circles, and her flamboyant personality often drew comment. Yet, despite these societal constraints and the clear impropriety of the situation, the bond between them deepened, setting the stage for a profound and enduring attachment that would challenge conventional morality and become a defining, though often whispered about, aspect of Nelson's later life. The relationship that developed between Horatio Nelson, Lady Emma Hamilton, and Sir William Hamilton in Naples was one of distinct complexity, defying simple categorization. It was not merely a clandestine affair, but rather an intricate personal dynamic that unfolded under the watchful, if often indulgent, eye of the ambassador himself. Sir William Hamilton, a man of Enlightenment sensibilities and a devoted antiquarian, appears to have viewed his wife's connection to Nelson with a degree of philosophical acceptance, or perhaps resignation. He admired Nelson's professional achievements, and seems to have genuinely valued his company. For Nelson, Emma represented a profound emotional solace. His life at sea had been one of relentless duty, danger, and often loneliness. His marriage to Fanny had, over time, perhaps become more a matter of polite companionship than passionate devotion. Emma, with her vivacious spirit, her unreserved adoration, and her capacity for deep emotional engagement, filled a void that Nelson had likely carried for years. She provided a sense of domestic warmth and personal validation that was intensely appealing to a man who had sacrificed so much for his country. Emma, in turn, found in Nelson a hero who returned her affection with an intensity she craved. Her background had not afforded her the conventional social standing of many aristocratic women, and her rise had been through her charm and beauty. To be the object of devotion for the greatest naval hero of the age was a powerful validation of her own worth. She became his confidant, his nurse during bouts of illness, and a passionate advocate for his reputation. This triangular arrangement, however unconventional, sustained itself for a period. Sir William often accompanied them, creating a facade of propriety that, while thin, offered a measure of social protection. Yet, beneath the surface, the emotional currents ran deep and strong, and the true nature of Nelson and Emma's bond was becoming increasingly apparent to those in their close circle. For a national hero like Nelson, such a liaison carried significant societal implications. The rigid moral codes of late 18th and early 19th century Britain placed a high value on marital fidelity and public decorum, particularly for figures in positions of national importance. While naval officers were sometimes afforded a degree of leniency due to their long absences and the unique stresses of their profession, an open and sustained relationship outside of marriage was a significant transgression. For Nelson, whose fame was now immense, any perceived moral failing could tarnish his carefully constructed public image and potentially undermine his standing with the Admiralty and the Crown. The growing intensity of this private arrangement would soon force its way into the public sphere, and creating a dilemma for Nelson that pitted his personal desires against his public duty and the expectations of a nation that adored him, yet held its heroes to a specific standard of conduct. The delicate balance of this complex triangle, for all its emotional sustenance, was inherently precarious. Nelson's presence in Naples, following the triumph at the Nile, swiftly drew him into the turbulent currents of Neapolitan politics. The Kingdom of Naples, under King Ferdinand IV and Queen Maria Carolina, sister to the executed Marie Antoinette, was a staunch ally of Great Britain and deeply hostile to revolutionary France. However, French military successes on land had emboldened Republican sympathisers within Naples itself, leading to the flight of the royal family to Sicily in late 1798, transported there on Nelson's flagship. In their absence, a French-backed provisional government, known as the Parthenopean Republic, was declared in January 1799. Nelson, as the preeminent British naval officer in the Mediterranean, found himself in a difficult position. His primary duty was to protect British interests and support its allies. For Queen Maria Carolina, a close friend of Emma Hamilton, Nelson was seen as the deliverer who could restore her family to their throne. This personal connection, combined with his fervent anti-French sentiment, deeply influenced his actions. By the summer of 1799, a royalist counter-revolution, led by Cardinal Fabrizio Ruffo and supported by British, Russian and Turkish forces, had largely succeeded in overthrowing the Parthenopean Republic. Ruffo had offered generous terms of surrender to the Republican forces, guaranteeing safe passage for many who wished to leave Naples. However, upon Nelson's arrival in the Bay of Naples in late June, bringing the King and Queen back, he annulled these capitulations. Nelson viewed the Republicans as traitors and rebels who had allied with the enemy. He saw the terms offered by Ruffo as an unacceptable compromise with those who had defied their legitimate monarch. His decision to override the previous agreement led to a harsh suppression. Leading Neapolitan Republicans who had surrendered under the promise of safe conduct were arrested, tried, and many were executed. Among them was Francesco Caracciolo, a former Neapolitan admiral who was controversially hanged from the yardarm of his own ship on Nelson's direct order, before a Neapolitan court-martial could fully convene. This period in Naples remains one of the most controversial aspects of Nelson's career. Critics argue that his actions were a violation of military honour and international law, driven by personal vendetta and the undue influence of the Neapolitan court, particularly Queen Maria Carolina and Emma Hamilton. Supporters contend that Nelson was merely enforcing the will of a sovereign monarch against rebellious subjects, and that the original terms of surrender were illegitimate. Regardless of interpretation, Nelson's involvement in the brutal suppression of the Parthenopean Republic stands as a stark contrast to his celebrated naval victories, revealing a darker, more politically entangled dimension to his character and leadership. The events in Naples, while solidifying his commitment to the Bourbon monarchy, also left a lasting stain on his otherwise brilliant reputation. The journey back to England in 1800, after years of service and the dramatic events in Naples, was not a simple return to quiet domesticity for Horatio Nelson. Instead, it marked the beginning of a period of intense public scrutiny and personal turmoil. Nelson travelled overland with Sir William and Lady Hamilton, a trio whose unconventional living arrangement had become an open secret in Neapolitan society. Their slow, deliberate progress across Europe, celebrated in some quarters and observed with increasing curiosity in others, only served to amplify the nascent rumours. Upon their arrival in England, the public's perception of Nelson was a complex tapestry of adoration and growing unease. He was still the hero of the Nile, the one-armed, one-eyed embodiment of British naval might and courage. His name evoked images of decisive victory and national pride. Yet, alongside this veneration, a more disquieting narrative began to take hold. The visible intimacy between Nelson and Emma Hamilton, often displayed without apparent discretion, fueled a burgeoning public scandal. The presence of Sir William Hamilton, Emma's husband, seemed to provide a thin veneer of respectability, but it could not entirely mask the nature of the relationship. Sir William, an elderly and urbane diplomat, appeared to accept the situation with a philosophical detachment that baffled and disturbed much of polite society. This unusual domestic arrangement, openly defying the rigid social conventions of the era, became a constant source of gossip and speculation in London's drawing rooms and beyond. And Nelson's wife, Frances, often referred to as Fanny, found herself in an increasingly untenable position. She'd waited patiently for her husband's return, only to discover him deeply entangled with another woman. The contrast between Nelson's public image as an unimpeachable national hero and the undeniable irregularities of his private life became a stark and uncomfortable reality. While the public still cheered his name, whispers about his moral conduct grew louder. The press, ever keen to exploit public interest, began to subtly, and sometimes not so subtly, allude to the affair. Nelson, accustomed to the universal adulation that followed his victories, now found himself navigating a new kind of battleground, the court of public opinion, where his personal choices were increasingly weighed against his professional achievements. This period marked a significant shift as the once unblemished hero began to contend with the complexities of fame and the unforgiving gaze of a society grappling with changing moral landscapes. The quiet comfort he might have sought in retirement was instead replaced by the relentless clamour of public interest and the quiet anguish of a fractured personal life. The growing tension and awkwardness surrounding Horatio Nelson's personal life reached an unavoidable crescendo, culminating in a painful and public separation from his wife, Frances Nisbet. This rupture was not a sudden event, but rather the culmination of years of emotional distance, exacerbated by Nelson's profound attachment to Emma Hamilton. The return to England had only intensified the strain, placing Fanny in an increasingly isolated and humiliating position. For years, while Fanny had endured her husband's long absences, the perils of his profession, and the slow erosion of their marital bond. She had been a dutiful wife, managing their domestic affairs and offering a quiet, stable presence. However, Nelson's infatuation with Emma Hamilton had consumed him, leaving little room for his wife. The open display of affection between Nelson and Emma in England, even within their own home, became unbearable for Fanny. Her quiet dignity was continuously tested by the presence of her rival, who occupied a central place in her husband's life, both emotionally and physically. The final break occurred in January of 1801. The details of the separation are somewhat shrouded in the quiet sorrow of a private matter, unfolding under a public gaze. It is understood that the decision, though painful for both parties, was ultimately driven by Nelson's unwavering commitment to Emma. He could no longer maintain the pretense of a conventional marriage, while his heart and affections lay elsewhere. The conversation, likely strained and filled with unspoken regrets, severed a connection that had once offered him solace during his periods ashore. From that point forward, Nelson and Fanny lived entirely separate lives. While there was no formal divorce, which would have been a scandalous and complicated legal process, their estrangement was complete and irreversible. Nelson ensured Fanny received a modest income, but their personal relationship ceased. This separation marked a significant turning point in Nelson's personal narrative. It was a clear and public declaration of his devotion to Emma, signalling his willingness to sacrifice societal approval and his marital vows for this new, passionate connection. For Fanny, the separation brought profound heartbreak and loneliness. She retreated from the public eye, living a quiet existence, forever linked to the celebrated admiral but forever apart from him. For Nelson, it was a decision laden with personal cost, a stark contrast to the unambiguous victories he achieved at sea. This personal upheaval, though driven by affection, created a void that even his naval triumphs could not entirely fill. The quiet dissolution of his marriage underscored the deep complexities and personal sacrifices inherent in his extraordinary life. As the new century dawned, Great Britain found itself facing a fresh and concerning geopolitical challenge in the northern waters of Europe. The conflict with revolutionary France continued, but a different kind of threat emerged, one that jeopardized the very arteries of British maritime trade and naval dominance. This new development was the formation of the League of Armed Neutrality in 1800, a coalition that brought together several powerful northern European states. At its core, the League was a response to Britain's aggressive naval policy, particularly its practice of searching neutral merchant ships for contraband destined for France. This practice, known as the right of search, was seen by other nations as an infringement on their sovereignty and a disruption to their commercial interests. The leading force behind this new alliance was Russia, under the unpredictable Tsar Paul I, who had grown increasingly alienated from Britain. Russia was soon joined by other significant naval powers, Prussia, Denmark, and Sweden. The stated aim of the League was to protect neutral shipping rights, asserting the principle that free ships make free goods, meaning that neutral vessels should not be subject to search or seizure, even if carrying goods to a belligerent nation. While seemingly a matter of international law, the implications for Great Britain were profound and deeply concerning. Should the League enforce its principles with military strength, it would effectively cut off Britain from vital resources, particularly naval stores like timber, tar, and hemp, which were crucial for maintaining its powerful fleet. Much of these essential supplies originated from the Baltic Sea region, controlled by these very neutral nations. Furthermore, the League's formation subtly played into the hands of France. By challenging British naval supremacy and diverting British attention and resources, it eased the pressure on Napoleon's war efforts. The prospect of an alliance of northern navies, even if ostensibly neutral, posed a significant strategic threat. It presented the possibility of a formidable combined fleet that could potentially challenge British control of the seas, or at the very least, tie up a considerable portion of the Royal Navy in the Baltic. The British government, led by Prime Minister William Pitt the Younger, viewed the League of Armed Neutrality not merely as an economic inconvenience, but as a direct act of hostility. It was perceived as a concerted effort to undermine Britain's ability to wage war against France and to challenge the very foundations of its maritime power. A decisive response was deemed necessary, one that would dismantle the League before it could fully consolidate its strength and inflict irreparable damage on British interests. The stage was set for another naval confrontation, far from the warmer waters of the Mediterranean, in the cold, intricate passages of the Baltic Sea. The British fleet dispatched to the Baltic to confront the League of Armed Neutrality found itself anchored off Copenhagen in the early spring of 1801. Admiral Sir Hyde Parker, the commander-in-chief, initially hesitated, preferring negotiation over direct engagement. However, Vice Admiral Horatio Nelson, second in command, days pressed for immediate and decisive action, recognising the strategic urgency of dismantling the Danish defences. His persistent arguments eventually prevailed, and on April 2nd, Nelson was given command of the Shallow Draft Squadron, tasked with attacking the Danish line of defence. The Danish defences were formidable, consisting of a long line of block ships, hulks, and floating batteries, supported by shore batteries from the city and the Tree-Krone fortress. The narrow channels and treacherous shoals of the Sound made navigation perilous, adding to the challenge. Nelson, aboard his flagship HMS Elephant, led his division into the congested waters, initiating a fierce and prolonged engagement. The battle quickly became a brutal exchange of cannon fire at close quarters. As the hours passed, the intensity of the battle began to tell on the British ships. Several vessels ran aground or sustained heavy damage. From his position aboard HMS London, further from the main action, Admiral Parker grew increasingly concerned by the severity of the Danish resistance and the visible distress of some British ships. At approximately 1:30 p.m, Parker hoisted the signal for "discontinue the engagement." This signal, if obeyed, would have meant a retreat for Nelson's hard-pressed squadron. However, Nelson, standing on the quarterdeck of the Elephant, was made aware of the signal. He famously raised his telescope to his blind eye, stating that he really did not see the signal. He turned to his flag captain, Thomas Foley, and remarked, "You know, Foley, I have only one eye. I have a right to be blind sometimes." He then famously added, "I really do not see the signal." Instead of retreating, Nelson gave the order to hoist the signal for close action, emphasizing his determination to press the attack. His audacious decision proved pivotal. The battle continued with renewed ferocity. The Danish resistance, despite its initial strength, gradually began to crumble under the sustained British bombardment. Eventually, Nelson sent a flag of truce to the Danish Crown Prince, offering a cessation of hostilities to remove the wounded from the burning Danish ships. This offer, combined with the devastating losses inflicted by the British, led to a ceasefire and ultimately a truce. Nelson's decisive and insubordinate action at Copenhagen secured a vital victory for Britain. It shattered the League of Armed Neutrality, effectively removing Denmark from the coalition and sending a clear message to Russia and Sweden. The Blind Eye incident became a legendary testament to Nelson's unyielding resolve and his willingness to defy orders when he believed it was necessary for victory, further cementing his reputation as an unconventional and brilliant naval commander. The moment of decision during the Battle of Copenhagen, when Admiral Parker's signal to retreat was sighted, encapsulates the essence of Nelson's independent judgment and his audacious spirit. It was a critical juncture where strict adherence to protocol might have led to a costly withdrawal, squandering the efforts already expended and leaving the strategic objective unfulfilled. Nelson, from the deck of HMS Elephant, was in the thick of the engagement, here with the Danish defences still presenting a formidable challenge, yet also showing signs of weakening under the relentless British fire. His response to Parker's signal was not merely an act of defiance, but a calculated and deeply considered judgment formed amidst the chaos of battle. Nelson possessed an uncanny ability to assess a complex situation rapidly, weighing the immediate dangers against the potential for a decisive victory. He understood that a retreat at that moment would not only concede the battle, but also potentially embolden the League of Armed Neutrality, prolonging the conflict and undermining British naval prestige. The famous gesture of raising the telescope to his blind eye, and his understated remark, "I really do not see the signal," was more than a theatrical flourish. It was a deliberate act to circumvent an order he deemed strategically unsound without directly challenging the authority of his superior. This act showcased his courage, not just in facing enemy fire, but in taking personal responsibility for a decision that went against established naval procedure. Such moments define leadership in its most profound sense, where an individual's conviction overrides conventional wisdom. By ordering the signal for close action to be hoisted instead, Nelson reaffirmed his commitment to pressing the attack. This counter-signal was a powerful statement to his squadron, dispelling any thought of retreat and galvanizing his captains to continue the fight with renewed resolve. It demonstrated his deep trust in his officers and men, and his belief in their capacity to achieve victory even under the most trying circumstances. The outcome validated his independent judgment. The continued engagement eventually broke the Danish resistance, leading to a truce and a significant British triumph. This victory at Copenhagen was crucial in dissolving the League of Armed Neutrality. thereby safeguarding British maritime interests and securing the flow of vital naval supplies from the Baltic. The Blind Eye incident thus stands as a vivid illustration of Nelson's unique command style, a blend of strategic brilliance, personal courage, and an unshakable belief in the power of decisive action, all of which contributed to his legendary status and secured yet another crucial victory for the British Crown. Following years of relentless conflict that had consumed Europe, a fragile moment of respite arrived with the signing of the Treaty of Amiens in March of 1802. This agreement, forged between Great Britain and France, along with their respective allies, brought a temporary cessation to the hostilities that had raged almost continuously since 1793. For the first time in nearly a decade, the continent could breathe a collective sigh of relief, hopeful that the long era of war was finally drawing to a close. The general sentiment across Britain and France was one of profound weariness. The economic strain of protracted warfare, the constant threat of invasion, and the immense human cost had taken a heavy toll on all nations involved. The Peace of Amiens was therefore greeted with widespread jubilation. Public celebrations erupted in London and Paris, as people dared to imagine a future free from the shadow of conflict. There was a genuine, though perhaps naive, belief that this treaty represented a permanent shift towards a more stable and peaceful international order. For ordinary citizens, the peace meant the reopening of trade routes, the potential for reduced taxes, and the return of loved ones from military service. The prospect of unhindered travel between Britain and France, a luxury denied for so long, was eagerly anticipated. Many envisioned a period of rebuilding and recovery, allowing societies to mend the wounds inflicted by years of bloodshed. However, beneath this veneer of optimism, significant underlying tensions remained. The core ideological differences that had fueled the French Revolutionary Wars were far from resolved. Napoleon Bonaparte, now First Consul of France, continued to pursue an expansionist agenda, consolidating French power on the continent and making moves that alarmed the British government. His actions in Italy, Switzerland and the Netherlands suggested a continued ambition that seemed incompatible with a lasting peace. Britain, for its part, remained deeply suspicious of French intentions, particularly regarding naval power and colonial expansion. The terms of the treaty itself were viewed with mixed feelings by some British politicians, who felt that too many concessions had been made. The brief interlude of peace allowed both nations to regroup and rearm, rather than fundamentally altering their strategic objectives. Thus, the hope for enduring tranquility proved to be tragically short-lived. The Peace of Amiens, rather than marking a true end to the conflict, served more as an uneasy pause. It was a period of watchful waiting, a temporary calm before the inevitable storm. Within little more than a year, the fundamental irreconcilable differences would once again ignite, plunging Europe back into the crucible of war, with Horatio Nelson once more called to the forefront of the naval struggle. During the brief interlude of peace afforded by the Treaty of Amiens, Horatio Nelson sought to establish a semblance of domesticity, a life far removed from the rigours of naval command. He retired, at least temporarily, to Merton Place in Surrey, a country estate purchased with funds from his prize money and a substantial gift from the nation. Here he endeavoured to create a home with Lady Emma Hamilton and her elderly husband, Sir William Hamilton. This arrangement, however, was inherently unconventional, a public acknowledgement of a relationship that had long been the subject of societal whispers and private scandal. The household at Merton Place was a curious blend of quiet domesticity and a lingering sense of the extraordinary. Nelson, accustomed to the disciplined routines of a warship, now attempted to immerse himself in the rhythms of country life. He took an interest in the estate, overseeing improvements to the grounds and gardens. finding a measure of contentment in these terrestrial pursuits. Emma, with her vivacious personality, sought to create a welcoming and lively atmosphere, though the shadow of their irregular union inevitably hung over their existence. It was within this unusual domestic sphere that a profoundly significant event unfolded, the birth of their daughter, Horatio. Born in January 1801, during Nelson's brief return to England between naval engagements, her arrival was kept a closely guarded secret, a testament to the societal pressures and moral judgments surrounding their relationship. Nelson and Emma referred to Horatio as adopted, carefully constructing a narrative to protect her from scandal, though the truth of her parentage was an open secret within their intimate circle. Horatio's presence brought a new dimension to Nelson's life. Despite his public image as a fierce warrior, he revealed a tender and devoted paternal side. He cherished his daughter, writing to her with great affection and expressing a deep concern for her well-being and future. His letters from sea would often contain heartfelt inquiries about her, demonstrating a profound emotional connection that perhaps surprised even himself. Life at Merton Place, therefore, offered Nelson a precious, if fleeting, taste of a different kind of heroism, that of a family man. He found solace and joy in the company of Emma and Horatio, creating a private world that contrasted sharply with the public demands of his illustrious career. This period represented a quiet chapter, a moment of personal reflection and domestic endeavour, before the renewed call to duty would once again draw him back to the unforgiving vastness of the sea. The peace, however, was merely a temporary lull, and the tranquil scenes at Merton Place would soon be disrupted by the escalating drums of war, and the fragile peace established by the Treaty of Amiens proved to be short-lived, a mere interlude in the vast protracted conflict that gripped Europe. By May of 1803, less than 14 months after its signing, the treaty had collapsed. The underlying tensions between Great Britain and France, never truly resolved, resurfaced with renewed intensity. Napoleon Bonaparte, now First Consul of France, harboured ambitions that extended far beyond the continental landmass. His vision was one of French dominance, and at the heart of this ambition lay the formidable obstacle of British power. The resumption of hostilities brought with it a palpable shift in the strategic landscape. Napoleon, consolidating his grip on power and transforming the French Republic into an empire, turned his gaze across the English Channel. The dream of invading Britain, a concept that had periodically tantalized French rulers for centuries, now became a central pillar of his strategy. He began to amass a vast army, known as the Army of England, along the French coast, primarily at Boulogne. Barracks were constructed, training exercises were conducted, and an immense flotilla of flat-bottomed invasion barges was built, designed to ferry troops across the narrow strait. This overt preparation for invasion sent ripples of alarm throughout Britain. The threat was perceived as existential, a direct challenge to the nation's sovereignty and very existence. The island nation, inherently reliant on its naval strength for defence, understood that its fate rested upon the capabilities of the Royal Navy. Should the French manage to gain even temporary control of the Channel, then allowing Napoleon's legions to land, the consequences would be catastrophic. The task of preventing this invasion fell squarely upon the shoulders of the British fleet. It necessitated a constant, vigilant blockade of French ports, a relentless watch over the movements of Napoleon's ships, and a readiness to engage the enemy at a moment's notice. The Royal Navy became the nation's shield, its omnipresent force a deterrent against the grand design unfolding across the water. This renewed state of war meant that the quiet domesticity Nelson had briefly enjoyed at Merton Place was irrevocably shattered. The call to duty, a summons he had always answered, now resonated with an even greater urgency. The nation needed its most experienced and audacious commanders to confront this unprecedented threat. The delicate balance of peace had dissolved, replaced by the stark reality of war, and the stage was set for the ultimate confrontation between the formidable land power of Napoleon and the unwavering sea power of Great Britain. The fate of an empire, and indeed of Europe, now hung precariously in the balance, dependent on the ability of the Royal Navy to thwart Napoleon's grand design. With the resumption of war in May 1803, the British Admiralty wasted no time in recalling its most celebrated naval hero to active service. The strategic situation demanded a commander of unparalleled experience and audacious spirit, particularly in the vital Mediterranean theatre. Horatio Nelson, despite his efforts to embrace a quiet domestic life at Merton, was swiftly appointed Commander-in-Chief of the Mediterranean Fleet. Yet this was a position of immense responsibility, one that would place him at the forefront of Britain's defence against Napoleon's burgeoning ambitions. Nelson hoisted his flag aboard HMS Victory, a majestic three-decked ship of the line, which would become synonymous with his final, most significant campaigns. His departure from England was marked by the quiet solemnity that often accompanies such momentous farewells in times of war. He left behind Emma Hamilton and their daughter, Horatio, understanding that the demands of duty now superseded all personal attachments. The sea once again became his primary domain, and the welfare of the nation his singular focus. His strategic task was clear, yet immensely challenging: to blockade the principal French and Spanish fleets in their respective ports, and crucially to prevent their junction. The combined naval power of France and Spain, if allowed to unite, would represent a formidable force, potentially capable of challenging British supremacy in the Atlantic and even facilitating the long-feared invasion of Britain itself. The Mediterranean, therefore, was not merely a regional theatre, it was a critical front in the global struggle against Napoleonic France. Nelson's command extended across a vast expanse of sea, from the Strait of Gibraltar to the Levant. His primary focus was Toulon, the major French naval base on the Mediterranean coast, where a significant portion of Napoleon's fleet lay. For 2 arduous years, from the summer of 1803 to the spring of 1805, Nelson maintained a relentless blockade of Toulon. This was a task of immense patience and logistical complexity, requiring constant vigilance, a careful provisioning of ships, and the maintenance of morale among his crews. The nature of blockade duty was often monotonous, punctuated by fierce gales and the ever-present threat of enemy sorties. Nelson, however, understood its profound strategic importance. By keeping the French fleet bottled up in Toulon, he neutralised a significant portion of Napoleon's naval strength and protected British trade routes. His presence in the Mediterranean also served as deterrent to French expansionist ambitions in the region, safeguarding British interests in Sicily, Malta, and the Ottoman Empire. His command was characterised by the same meticulous planning, inspirational leadership, and unwavering determination that had defined his earlier campaigns. He instilled in his captains and crews a deep understanding of their mission, fostering a sense of shared purpose and a readiness for battle. The long silent watches at sea, the endless patrols, and the constant readiness for engagement were all part of a larger, intricate game of naval strategy, designed to keep Napoleon's grand designs firmly in check. The 2 years that followed Nelson's assumption of command were largely defined by the relentless, often unglamorous duty of blockade. His primary objective was to keep the French fleet confined within the harbour of Toulon. This was not a task of dramatic battles and swift victories, but rather one of enduring patience, constant vigilance, and the subtle art of naval presence. The Mediterranean fleet, under Nelson's watchful eye, maintained its station off the French coast, a silent, ever-present threat. the monotony of the blockade was profound. Day after day, week after week, the ships of the line, frigates and smaller vessels patrolled the designated sectors, their crews scanning the horizon for any sign of French movement. The ships themselves endured the constant wear and tear of sea life. Salt spray corroded rigging, timbers groaned under the stress of waves, and sails frayed in the sun and wind. Routine maintenance became a perpetual chore, performed far from the comforts of port. For the men aboard, life was a cycle of duty, watch, and the quiet contemplation of the distant enemy. Sickness, scurvy, and accidents were constant companions in the close confines of the ships. Yet, Nelson understood that the effectiveness of the blockade depended not just on the strength of his vessels, but on the morale and discipline of his sailors. He made efforts to ensure regular supplies, even if they had to be sourced from distant ports like Sardinia or Gibraltar. Fresh water, vital provisions, and even occasional mail from home were crucial for sustaining spirits. Nelson's leadership during this period was characterized by a deep empathy for his men and an unwavering focus on their training. He understood that idleness could breed discontent, and so he ensured that drills and exercises were regularly conducted. Gunnery practice, sail handling, and tactical manoeuvres kept the crews sharp and prepared for the moment the French fleet might finally emerge. He fostered a sense of camaraderie and shared purpose, reminding his officers and men of the critical role they played in protecting their homeland. The constant strategic game played out in his mind. Nelson knew the French admiral, Latouche-Treville, Rem was a capable opponent, and later, Villeneuve. He anticipated their movements, studied their likely intentions, and adjusted his dispositions accordingly. His ships were always positioned to intercept, to cut off any attempted escape, or to engage in battle should the opportunity arise. This long, patient vigil off Toulon was a testament to Nelson's strategic foresight and his profound understanding of naval warfare. It was a period devoid of major engagements, yet it was strategically vital, directly contributing to the security of Britain by containing a significant portion of Napoleon's naval power. The quiet endurance of the blockade laid the groundwork for the more dramatic events that were yet to unfold. The long vigil off Toulon was finally broken in January of 1805. Under the command of Admiral Villeneuve, the French fleet, seizing an opportune moment of severe weather that had driven Nelson's ships briefly from their positions, managed to slip out of the harbour. This escape was a strategic blow to the British, as Napoleon's grand plan for the invasion of England hinged on the concentration of his naval forces, and Villeneuve's fleet was a crucial component. Nelson, upon learning of the escape, was consumed by a profound sense of urgency. He knew that Villeneuve's ultimate destination was likely the West Indies, where the French intended to rendezvous with other naval units, gather strength, and then return to European waters, overwhelming the British Channel Fleet and clearing the way for Napoleon's invasion barges. The stakes were immense. Britain's very survival depended on preventing this junction. Without a moment's hesitation, Nelson began his relentless pursuit. With only 10 ships of the line, he set off across the vast expanse of the Atlantic, following the elusive French fleet, which numbered nearly twice as many vessels. This was a chase driven by instinct, experience, and an unparalleled determination. Nelson had no concrete intelligence of Villeneuve's exact route. He relied on his deep understanding of naval strategy, the prevailing winds, and the likely objectives of his adversary. The voyage was arduous. Nelson pushed his ships and crews to their limits, sailing with a speed and tenacity that astonished his contemporaries. The crossing itself was a feat of navigation and endurance. His fleet arrived in the West Indies in early June, having covered thousands of miles in a remarkably short time, and only to find that Villeneuve had already made his presence felt, causing considerable alarm among the British colonies. Villeneuve, having learned of Nelson's astonishingly swift pursuit, and perhaps unnerved by the thought of encountering his relentless adversary, made a crucial decision. Instead of lingering in the West Indies to gather strength as originally planned, he turned his fleet back towards Europe. Nelson, ever vigilant, quickly deduced his opponent's change of course. Without delay, Nelson turned his own fleet around and embarked on the return journey across the Atlantic. This epic double crossing of the ocean, a chase of over 7,000 miles in total, was a testament to Nelson's extraordinary drive and his strategic genius. Though he did not directly engage Villeneuve in the West Indies, his mere presence and the speed of his pursuit had disrupted Napoleon's carefully laid plans, forcing the French admiral to abandon his objectives and retreat. The chase had been exhausting, yet it had achieved its primary goal: to prevent the concentration of enemy forces and to protect the vital British interests on both sides of the Atlantic. The strategic significance of Nelson's arduous pursuit of Villeneuve across the Atlantic cannot be overstated, even though no grand naval battle was fought in the Caribbean. The chase itself, a monumental feat of seamanship and determination, fundamentally altered the course of Napoleon's carefully constructed invasion plans for Great Britain. Napoleon's strategy was intricate and depended entirely on naval superiority in the English Channel for a limited, critical period. His plan involved drawing the Royal Navy's main forces away from European waters, primarily to the West Indies, thereby creating a window for his invasion fleet to cross unmolested. Villeneuve's escape from Toulon and his subsequent voyage to the Caribbean were intended to be the first steps in this elaborate deception. The French fleet was to rendezvous with other Spanish and French squadrons, gain strength, and then return to the Channel, overwhelming the remaining British defences. Nelson's pursuit, however, introduced an unforeseen and disruptive element into this calculation. His audacious decision to follow Villeneuve with a numerically inferior force demonstrated an unparalleled grasp of naval strategy and an unwavering commitment to the defence of his homeland. The sheer speed and relentless nature of his chase instilled a profound unease in Villeneuve. The French admiral, knowing Nelson's reputation for aggressive action and understanding the potential consequences of being caught at a disadvantage, became increasingly cautious. Villeneuve's primary directive was to concentrate forces, not to engage Nelson in a decisive battle in the West Indies, especially not when his fleet was still dispersed and not at its full strength. The psychological pressure exerted by Nelson's mere presence, even at a distance, was enough to compel Villeneuve to abort his mission in the Caribbean. Instead of lingering to consolidate his forces, Villeneuve turned his ships eastward, opting to return to European waters. This decision, born from caution and an understandable apprehension of Nelson's strategic prowess, directly undermined Napoleon's grand design. By forcing Villeneuve's premature return, Nelson effectively dismantled the critical first phase of Napoleon's invasion scheme. The French fleet, instead of returning as a formidable, concentrated force to sweep the Channel, was now merely returning to Europe, still needing to find a way to unite with other squadrons. Nelson's pursuit, therefore, was not merely a physical chase but a profound strategic victory, demonstrating that the presence of a determined and skilled commander could disrupt even the most meticulously planned operations. His relentless pressure had saved Britain from the immediate threat of invasion, buying precious time and forcing Napoleon to reconsider his entire approach. The absence of a direct engagement did not diminish the profound impact of Nelson's strategic brilliance during this period. As the summer of 1805 began to wane, a formidable concentration of naval power lay anchored within the sheltered bay of Cadiz. Here, the combined fleets of France and Spain had gathered, a testament to the complex alliances and strategic manoeuvrings of the Napoleonic Wars. Under the command of French Admiral Pierre-Charles Villeneuve, the fleet represented a significant portion of the maritime strength available to Napoleon. Villeneuve's return from the West Indies, hastened by Nelson's persistent pursuit, had been fraught with uncertainty. His original orders to clear the English Channel had been thwarted, and his subsequent engagements, though minor, had further eroded his confidence in the morale of his crews. Yet despite these setbacks, the sheer number of ships now assembled in Cadiz presented a potent threat to British naval dominance. The combined fleet comprised a significant array of ships of the line, ranging from powerful three-deckers to smaller but still formidable two-deckers. French and Spanish flags flew side by side, signifying a fragile but necessary alliance forged against their common enemy. The harbour became a hive of activity, as sailors and dock workers laboured to provision, repair, and prepare these vessels for their next great undertaking. Masts were checked, rigging inspected, and cannons loaded, all under the watchful eyes of their respective officers. However, beneath the outward display of strength, challenges persisted. The Spanish ships, though numerous, often suffered from a lack of consistent maintenance and adequately trained crews, a legacy of years of intermittent warfare and economic strain. The French crews, while generally more proficient, had endured the long and arduous voyage to the West Indies and back, followed by a period of relative inactivity which could dull their edge. Discipline, supply, and the overall state of readiness varied considerably across the diverse fleet. Admiral Villeneuve himself was a man burdened by immense pressure. He was acutely aware of Napoleon's towering expectations and his own perceived failures to execute the Emperor's initial plans. The weight of command, coupled with a deep-seated apprehension regarding the Royal Navy's fighting prowess, contributed to a cautious, almost hesitant demeanour. He knew that this grand fleet, now poised in Cadiz, was destined for a decisive engagement, one that could either break Britain's naval power or seal the fate of Napoleon's maritime ambitions. The stage was set, the pieces were in place, and the anticipation of a monumental clash hung heavy in the air, rippling across the tranquil waters of the bay. The early autumn of 1805 brought with it a profound sense of gravity for Vice Admiral Horatio Nelson. After a brief period ashore, a respite spent largely at Merton with Emma Hamilton and their young daughter, Horatio, the call to duty had once again resounded. The news of the combined French and Spanish fleets consolidated at Cadiz had reached England, signalling that a decisive confrontation was not merely possible, but increasingly inevitable. This knowledge cast a long shadow over his final days on English soil. His departure from Merton, the home he had shared with Emma, was marked by a quiet poignancy. He understood, with a clarity that only experience and a lifetime of facing danger could provide, the immense stakes involved. The fate of Britain, indeed the course of the war, rested heavily upon the outcome of the impending naval engagement. The memory of the invasion barges gathered at Boulogne, though temporarily dispersed, remained a stark reminder of Napoleon's ambitions. The separation from Emma was particularly difficult. Their bond, forged through years of shared triumphs and scandals, had deepened into a profound affection. Their daughter, Horatio, a living embodiment of their controversial union, represented a future Nelson desperately wished to safeguard. He left them knowing that the mission ahead could very well be his last. There was a quiet solemnity in his farewells, a hushed understanding of the potential finality of the moment. On September 13th, 1805, Nelson embarked for Portsmouth, the great naval port from which so many voyages of destiny had begun. As his carriage made its way through the English countryside, he was met with spontaneous displays of public admiration. Crowds gathered along the route, eager to catch a glimpse of their national hero, the man who had so often delivered them from peril. Their cheers and blessings were heartfelt, a reflection of the deep trust and affection the nation held for him. Upon reaching Portsmouth, the scene intensified. The quays were thronged with people, a sea of faces straining to see him, to wish him well, their fervent hope for victory intertwined with a palpable anxiety for his safety, has created an atmosphere charged with emotion. Nelson, ever aware of his public role, acknowledged their heartfelt sentiments with a dignified grace. He boarded the HMS Victory, his flagship, for the last time. As the great ship prepared to weigh anchor, the familiar sights and sounds of a warship preparing for sea surrounded him. The creak of timbers, the shouts of the boatswain, the rustle of sails unfurling in the breeze, all were familiar harbingers of the voyage ahead. As the Victory slowly moved out into the Solent, leaving the shores of England behind, Nelson carried with him not only the hopes of a nation, but also the quiet, enduring images of Emma and Horatio, etched firmly in his mind as he sailed towards an uncertain yet historically significant future. Upon rejoining the fleet off Cadiz, Nelson dedicated himself to the meticulous preparation for the inevitable confrontation. His mind, ever analytical and innovative, turned to the development of a tactical plan that would ensure a decisive victory. He understood that the traditional naval tactics of the era, which often involved forming two opposing lines of battle and exchanging broadsides, frequently resulted in indecisive engagements. Nelson sought a method that would shatter the enemy's formation and allow for close-quarters fighting, where British gunnery and seamanship typically excelled. His tactical vision, often referred to as the Nelson touch, was revolutionary in its simplicity and audacity. Instead of forming a parallel line, Nelson intended to break the enemy's battle line by attacking it perpendicularly. He envisioned his fleet sailing in two columns, or divisions directly into the enemy's elongated formation. This approach was designed to concentrate overwhelming force on a specific section of the adversary's fleet, effectively cutting it off and creating localized superiority. One column, led by Nelson himself in HMS Victory, would aim for the enemy's centre. The other column, under the command of Vice Admiral Cuthbert Collingwood in HMS Royal Sovereign, would target the rear of the enemy's line. This direct head-on approach meant that the leading ships of the British columns would be exposed to raking fire from multiple enemy vessels for a period before they could bring their own broadsides to bear. It was a calculated risk, but one Nelson believed was necessary to achieve a decisive outcome. The objective of this pell-mell attack, as it was sometimes described, was to create chaos and confusion within the enemy's ranks. By breaking the line, Nelson aimed to prevent the combined French and Spanish fleets from coordinating their actions effectively. Once the enemy's formation was fragmented, individual British ships could engage multiple adversaries in a series of duels, relying on their superior training and aggressive spirit. Nelson communicated his plan to his captains well in advance of the engagement. He held detailed conferences, often on board the Victory, where he laid out his intentions and explained the rationale behind his unconventional strategy. He emphasized the importance of initiative and discretion once the battle commenced, trusting his officers to act decisively within the broader framework of his plan. This empowerment of his captains was a hallmark of Nelson's leadership, fostering a sense of shared purpose and ensuring that the overall objective would be pursued vigorously, even amidst the chaos of battle. His instructions were clear. No captain could do wrong by placing his ship alongside an enemy vessel. This directive underscored his desire for close, decisive action, a departure from the more cautious engagements that had often characterized naval warfare. The preparations were thorough, the vision articulated, and the fleet now awaited the opportunity to execute this bold and innovative plan. Beyond the innovative tactical plan itself, Nelson possessed a singular ability to imbue his vision with a profound sense of purpose among his officers and men. This was the essence of the Nelson touch, not merely a set of manoeuvres, but a deep-seated connection forged through trust, clarity, and shared ambition. He understood that even the most brilliant strategy was worthless without the unwavering commitment and understanding of those who would execute it. Nelson cultivated an atmosphere of aggressive initiative throughout his fleet. He did not simply issue orders, he explained his intentions, detailing the why behind the what. This collaborative approach, unusual for the hierarchical naval structures of the time, allowed his captains to comprehend the overarching objective. They were not merely cogs in a machine, they were empowered participants in a grand design. This clear communication fostered a sense of ownership and responsibility, ensuring that each officer understood their role and the spirit in which they were expected to act, even when direct orders were impossible to receive amidst the smoke and din of battle. His personal charisma was a powerful force. Nelson was adored by his sailors, not just for his victories, but for his genuine concern for their welfare and his willingness to share in their hardships. He was seen as a leader who led from the front, a man who had faced the same dangers they did, bearing the scars of past engagements. This shared experience built an extraordinary level of loyalty and devotion. The sailors knew that Nelson would never ask them to do anything he would not do himself, and this conviction fueled their courage. The morale of the British fleet at this critical juncture was exceptionally high. Years of blockade duty, though arduous, had honed their skills and instilled a fierce sense of professionalism. They were confident in their ships, their gunnery, and above all in their admiral. The very presence of Nelson seemed to infuse the fleet with an unstoppable energy. There was a palpable sense of anticipation and determination among the crews, a readiness to meet the combined French and Spanish forces. This collective spirit, born from Nelson's leadership, was perhaps as crucial as any tactical manoeuvre. It transformed a collection of individual ships into a cohesive fighting force, united by a common understanding and an unshakable belief in their mission. The Nelson touch was thus a blend of strategic brilliance and profound human leadership, creating an environment where courage and initiative were not just encouraged but expected. It was this intangible yet powerful element that distinguished Nelson's command and prepared his fleet for the momentous engagement that lay ahead. As the sun began to dip below the horizon on October 20th, 1805, a profound quiet settled over the British fleet. The air, usually alive with the ceaseless activity of a warship, was now imbued with a different kind of energy, a hushed collective anticipation. The combined fleets of France and Spain had been sighted. The long pursuit, the arduous blockade, and the strategic manoeuvring were drawing to their inevitable conclusion. On board HMS Victory, the flagship of Vice Admiral Horatio Nelson, the routine of the evening was performed with a deliberate calm. Yet beneath this surface tranquility, every soul understood the gravity of the coming dawn. Sailors moved with a quiet purpose, checking rigging, stowing loose gear, and preparing the great guns. The ship, a floating fortress, was being readied for the ultimate test of its strength and the courage of its crew. The low murmur of voices, the gentle creaking of timbers, and the distant lapping of waves against the hull were the only sounds disturbing the deepening twilight. Nelson himself spent the evening in a state of quiet reflection. He was a man accustomed to the immense pressures of command, but this battle, he sensed, carried a unique weight. He retired to his cabin, where he penned his final will and a poignant codicil, entrusting Lady Hamilton and his daughter Horatio to the care of his nation. These private moments reveal the profound human dimension beneath the formidable public persona. He was not merely a tactical genius. Then he was a man keenly aware of his mortality, yet utterly resolved in his duty. His thoughts were likely a complex tapestry of strategic considerations, concern for his men, and a deep personal commitment to the cause he served. He had meticulously planned the engagement, communicated his vision, and inspired his fleet. Now there was little more to do but wait for the light of day. The quiet of the night offered a final opportunity for contemplation, for the gathering of inner strength before the storm of battle would break. The atmosphere was not one of fear, but of an almost reverent solemnity. Each man, from the youngest powder monkey to the most seasoned captain, understood the immense stakes. The fate of Britain, and indeed the course of European history, hung in the balance. As the stars emerged in the vast silent expanse above, the fleet lay poised, a collection of wooden vessels and resolute souls, awaiting the dawn that would usher in one of the most decisive naval engagements in history. The calm before the storm was a period of profound resolve, a testament to the quiet strength that often precedes monumental events. The dawn of October 21st, 1805, broke over the Atlantic with a sense of profound clarity. A light breeze stirred the sails, and the sun, rising steadily, illuminated the vast expanse of the sea. In the distance, the combined fleets of France and Spain, numbering 33 ships of the line, were visible, forming their defensive crescent. Opposing them, the 27 British ships, led by Nelson in HMS Victory, began their deliberate approach. On the quarter-deck of Victory, Nelson appeared calm and resolute. He had given his final instructions, and now the moment of execution drew near. It was just before noon when he ordered the hoisting of a signal, one that would resonate through history. Through the intricate code of flags first hoisted to the masthead of Victory, then meticulously repeated by ship after ship down the line, a message began to unfurl. England expects that every man will do his duty. This particular message was not a tactical command in the strict sense. The fleet already understood its mission, having been thoroughly briefed on the Nelson touch. Instead, it was a profound affirmation, a rallying cry that tapped into the deepest reserves of patriotism and personal honour. The sight of the flags ascending and the slow, deliberate process of their interpretation across the fleet created a powerful, unifying moment. A cheer, spontaneous and heartfelt, rippled through the British ships as the full import of the message was grasped. It was a recognition of their individual responsibility, a quiet acknowledgement that each man's actions would contribute to the collective destiny. Nelson, ever aware of the morale of his men, had chosen his words carefully. The signal was not a demand, but an expectation, a trust placed in the character and courage of every sailor. It underscored the shared purpose that bound them together. As the ship slowly closed the distance, the British fleet formed its two columns, just as Nelson had planned. The Victory, leading the weather column, advanced steadily towards the enemy's centre, a formidable spearhead against the combined might of two empires. The approach was long and deliberate, allowing time for reflection and the final preparations for battle. The wind was light, making the advance slow, yet this only heightened the tension and the sense of impending clash. The silence of the approach was broken only by the creak of timber, the rustle of sails, and the distant, almost imperceptible sounds from the enemy fleet. Every eye was fixed on the approaching line. Every heart braced for the inevitable eruption of cannon fire that would soon engulf the tranquil morning. As the morning hours passed, the two British columns, driven by the light breeze, steadily closed the distance to the combined French and Spanish line. The ships moved with a quiet, powerful momentum, their sails taut against the sky. The Royal Sovereign, commanded by Vice Admiral Cuthbert Collingwood, was the first to engage, while leading the leeward column with a deliberate pace. Her commander, eager to be at the heart of the fray, pressed forward, leaving some of his following ships slightly behind. At approximately noon, the first shots were fired. The French flagship Fougueux, positioned towards the rear of the combined line, opened fire on the Royal Sovereign. Soon after, the Spanish Santa Ana, a formidable three-decker, unleashed a devastating broadside. The Royal Sovereign, enduring this concentrated fire without yet returning a shot, continued her relentless advance. Her intention was clear: to pierce the enemy line, not to engage in a distant exchange. Minutes later, the Royal Sovereign achieved her objective. She crashed through the Franco-Spanish line just astern of the Santa Ana, her bowsprit almost touching the stern of the Spanish flagship. With a thunderous roar, she unleashed a double-shotted broadside into the stern of the Santa Ana, a raking fire that swept the entire length of the Spanish ship, causing immense damage and chaos below decks. The close-quarters engagement, so central to Nelson's tactical vision, had begun. Meanwhile, a mile or so to the north, HMS Victory, with Nelson on board, led the weather column towards the centre of the enemy line. Her approach was met with equally fierce resistance. For a prolonged period, Victory endured a relentless bombardment from several French and Spanish ships. Cannonballs tore through her rigging, splintered her masts and crashed into her hull. Yet she maintained her course with unwavering determination. Nelson, conspicuous on his quarterdeck, remained exposed, a figure of calm authority amidst the escalating storm. The specific point of attack for Victory was the gap between the French flagship Bucentaure and the Redoutable. Around 12:45 p.m, Victory, having suffered considerable damage, finally broke through the enemy formation. Her bow came into contact with the stern of the Bucentaure, and as she swung around, she raked the French flagship with a devastating broadside. The battle, no longer a distant exchange, had dissolved into a series of brutal, close-range duels between individual ships. The carefully ordered lines had been shattered, just as Nelson had intended, transforming the engagement into a chaotic melee where British superior gunnery and seamanship would prove decisive. On the quarterdeck of HMS Victory, amidst the rising clamour of battle, Horatio Nelson stood in quiet observation. His figure was distinct, even from a distance. Unlike many officers who might have chosen more subdued attire for combat, Nelson wore his full admiral's uniform. This included his meticulously embroidered coat, adorned with the various stars and orders he had earned through a career of unparalleled success. The 4 stars of his orders, particularly the Star of the Order of the Bath, glittered prominently on his left breast, catching the light even through the smoke that now began to drift across the decks. This choice of dress was deliberate. It was a visible manifestation of his leadership, a symbol of his presence and authority to his men, and a challenge to the enemy. Yet, it also made him an unmistakable target. As the Victory pressed deeper into the enemy line, enduring a torrent of cannon fire, the dangers of his exposed position became increasingly evident. As splinters of wood flew through the air, rigging snapped, and the deck beneath his feet vibrated with the impact of incoming shot. Despite the escalating chaos, Nelson maintained a calm demeanour. He continued to direct the battle, offering quiet instructions and observations to Captain Thomas Hardy and other officers around him. His one arm, the other lost at Santa Cruz, was often seen resting on the breech of a cannon or gesturing towards a particular point of interest in the swirling battle. His mind, honed by decades of naval warfare, processed the evolving situation with remarkable clarity. He moved with a quiet purpose, surveying the unfolding drama. His gaze swept across the engagement, noting the progress of his own ships and the struggles of the enemy. The sheer volume of incoming fire was immense. Men fell around him, and the deck became slick with blood and water. Yet Nelson remained, a steadfast presence. His resolve was unyielding. He had come to fight this decisive battle, and he intended to oversee every critical moment of it. His presence on the quarterdeck was a source of inspiration to his crew. They saw their admiral, the hero of the Nile and Copenhagen, standing resolute, sharing their danger. This visible courage reinforced the deep trust and loyalty he had cultivated throughout his career. Even as the enemy's shot ripped through the air, Nelson's quiet command continued to guide the victory, and by extension, a significant portion of the British fleet through the heart of the most pivotal naval engagement of its time. As the battle intensified around HMS Victory, with the ship now locked in a desperate close-quarters engagement with the French Redoutable, Nelson continued to pace the quarterdeck. The air was thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder and the shouts of men. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed above the general din of cannon fire. It was the distinct sound of a musket shot. From the mizzen top of the Redoutable, positioned at a mere 15 yards, a French marine sniper had taken aim. The shot found its mark with chilling precision. Nelson, who had been conversing with Captain Hardy, suddenly staggered. A searing pain coursed through his body. He felt a violent blow to his left shoulder, just below his epaulette. The force of the impact spun him around, and he fell to his knees on the planked deck. Captain Hardy immediately turned, his face etched with concern, when he saw Nelson fall and rush to his side. Other officers and seamen, witnessing the Admiral's collapse, quickly gathered. A profound silence briefly descended upon the immediate vicinity, a stark contrast to the surrounding pandemonium, as the full gravity of the moment registered. Nelson, despite the excruciating pain, remained composed. He looked up at Hardy, and with a calm voice uttered words that conveyed both a sense of resignation and a clear understanding of his condition. He knew, almost instinctively, that the wound was mortal. The bullet had penetrated deep into his chest, puncturing a lung and severing an artery. A small group of sailors, led by Sergeant Major Secker of the Marines, carefully lifted their fallen admiral. They carried him gently from the quarter-deck, navigating the treacherous, debris-strewn path to the cockpit below. The cockpit, deep within the ship's hull, served as the primary dressing station during battle. It was a place of grim activity, already filled with the wounded and the dying. As they descended, Nelson requested that his face be covered with a handkerchief, not wishing to alarm the crew with the sight of their admiral severely wounded. The journey below deck was slow and deliberate, each step a careful negotiation of the ship's violent movements. The noise of the battle, though somewhat muffled by the thick timbers of the ship, still reverberated through the hull, a constant reminder of the ongoing struggle above. Nelson, now out of sight of the men fighting on deck, began his final hours, conscious of the battle's progress even in his fading state. In the dimly lit cockpit of HMS Victory, surrounded by the moans of the wounded and the frantic efforts of the surgeons, Nelson lay upon a makeshift bed. His pain was immense, a burning agony in his chest, yet his mind remained acutely focused on the battle unfolding above him. He repeatedly called for Captain Hardy, his trusted friend and commander, eager for news of the fleet's progress. The ship's surgeon, William Beatty, attended to him, but it was clear from the outset that the wound was beyond medical aid. The bullet had lodged deep in his spine, and Nelson knew his end was near. Despite his suffering, his primary concern was not for himself, but for the outcome of the engagement. He spoke in short, laboured phrases, his voice growing weaker with each passing minute. At last, after a long period of anxious waiting, Captain Hardy descended to the cockpit. His face, though grimed with powder and sweat, bore a look of triumph. Nelson, summoning his remaining strength, immediately inquired, "How goes the battle, Hardy? How goes the day with us?" Hardy knelt beside him, his voice thick with emotion. He reported that a glorious victory was in sight. Already, 14 or 15 of the enemy's ships had struck their colours. Nelson listened intently, a deep sigh of relief escaping his lips. "That is well," he murmured, "but I bargained for 20. He then inquired if any of the British ships had surrendered, and upon being assured that none had, a profound sense of satisfaction settled upon him. The news of victory seemed to infuse him with a momentary surge of strength. He spoke of his duty, of his love for Lady Hamilton, and of his desire to be remembered. He gave instructions for his body to be cared for and expressed his hopes for Captain Hardy's future. The sounds of cannon fire gradually lessened above, confirming the reports of the battle's turning tide. As the afternoon wore on, Nelson's breathing became increasingly shallow. He continued to express his gratitude for the victory, reaffirming his satisfaction that he had done his duty. His final words, spoken in a faint whisper, were, "Thank God I've done my duty." With these words, shortly after 4:30 in the afternoon, Horatio Nelson, the hero of Trafalgar, breathed his last. The greatest naval victory in British history had been secured, but at the cost of its most celebrated admiral. As the last echoes of Captain Hardy's report of victory faded in the cramped cockpit, a fragile peace seemed to settle over Nelson. His earlier urgency, driven by the desire to know the battle's outcome, gave way to a quiet resignation. He began to speak of his personal affairs, his voice barely a whisper, yet clear enough for those gathered around him to understand. He expressed his fervent hope that the nation would care for Lady Hamilton and their daughter, Horatio, a plea that highlighted the deep personal connections that had shaped his later life. He asked for his body to be committed to the care of his trusted surgeon, William Beatty, and for his remains to be taken back to England. Captain Hardy, his eyes heavy with sorrow, knelt once more beside his dying friend. Nelson, with a profound tenderness that belied the harshness of his surroundings, looked up at him. "Kiss me, Hardy," he requested softly. Hardy, deeply moved, and gently bent down and pressed his lips to the Admiral's cheek. It was a moment of profound human connection amidst the cold reality of impending death and the distant roar of battle. A little later, as his strength continued to ebb, Nelson turned his thoughts once more to his professional life, to the core of his being. His last words, delivered with a final, deliberate effort, encapsulated his entire existence. "Thank God I have done my duty," he murmured, the words fading into the hushed atmosphere of the cockpit. These words were not a lament, but a declaration of satisfaction, a testament to a life dedicated to service and to the ideals he held dear. With these final utterances, a deep calm descended upon him. His breathing became shallower, more distant until it ceased altogether. The great admiral, the hero whose very name had become synonymous with naval prowess, passed away peacefully, not amidst the glory of the quarter-deck, but in the confined, sombre space below, surrounded by the wounded and the dedicated men who had served him. The battle, though still raging in its final throes above, had already been won, and Nelson, having fulfilled his ultimate duty, was finally at rest. His life, a relentless pursuit of glory and service, had reached its quiet, inevitable conclusion. The thunder of cannons had barely subsided, and the smoke of battle still hung heavy over the waters off Cape Trafalgar, when a new, more formidable adversary began to gather on the horizon. As evening descended on October 21st, 1805, the sky darkened not just with nightfall, but with the ominous promise of a great storm. The sea, which had borne witness to such a decisive human conflict, now began to stir with its own powerful, indifferent fury. Within hours the weather deteriorated dramatically. A gale, fierce and unforgiving, swept across the Atlantic, transforming the scene of victory into one of desperate struggle for survival. The waves, which had been merely choppy during the engagement, now rose into towering mountains of water, crashing over the battered hulls of ships, both victorious and vanquished. The wind howled through torn rigging, sounding like a mournful dirge for the fallen. For the British fleet, already exhausted by battle and with many ships severely damaged, the storm presented a fresh and terrible challenge. Masts were broken, sails shredded, and many vessels struggled to maintain any semblance of control. The most immediate and heartbreaking consequence of this tempest was the plight of the captured enemy prizes. Many of these ships, already dismasted and holed, were now at the mercy of the raging elements. Their prize crews, often small and overwhelmed, fought a losing battle against the encroaching water and the relentless wind. Over the next few days, the storm raged relentlessly, causing immense destruction. Several of the captured French and Spanish ships, already on the verge of sinking, succumbed to the sea's power, foundering and taking with them countless souls who had survived the battle only to be lost to the storm. Others were driven ashore, dashed against the coast of Spain, becoming total wrecks. The British, with great difficulty and often at significant risk to their own crews, thus managed to save only a handful of the 20 prizes they had taken. Many more had to be deliberately scuttled to prevent them from falling back into enemy hands, or simply because they were beyond salvage. The storm thus added a tragic postscript to the great victory. It underscored the brutal realities of naval warfare, where human triumph could quickly be overshadowed by the raw, untamed power of nature. The immediate aftermath of Trafalgar was not a scene of triumphant celebration, but one of grim endurance, as the surviving ships and men fought for their very existence against the indifferent might of the ocean. Amidst the chaos and sorrow that followed the battle and the subsequent storm, a solemn duty was performed aboard HMS Victory. Horatio Nelson's body, carefully prepared, began its long voyage home. Knowing the journey would be extensive and the need for preservation paramount, a unique method was employed. His remains were placed in a large cask filled with brandy and spirits. This silent immersion served to protect the Admiral's body from the inevitable processes of decay during the weeks at sea. The cask was kept in the purser's cabin, a quiet, secluded space below deck. It was a place of reverence and hushed respect, a stark contrast to the thunderous violence that had so recently engulfed the ship. The crew, though grappling with their own losses and the immense challenges of keeping the battered Victory afloat, understood the profound significance of their cargo. The presence of Nelson's body, even in such an unconventional manner, imbued the ship with a heavy yet sacred atmosphere. The journey itself was slow and arduous. The Victory, heavily damaged and navigating the treacherous waters of the Atlantic in late autumn, could not make swift progress. Each creak of the timbers, each sway of the deck was a reminder of the battle endured and the precious, silent passenger on board. The ship made its way cautiously, first to Gibraltar for repairs, and then set a course for England. Day after day the ship pushed through the waves, its sails catching the wind, carrying not just the tattered remains of a fleet, but the physical embodiment of a nation's hero. The brandy, carefully replenished when necessary, performed its preserving function, allowing the Admiral to remain intact for the public mourning that awaited him. It was a testament to the era's understanding of such matters, a pragmatic and respectful effort to ensure that Nelson would be received in a manner befitting his sacrifice. The passage was a period of quiet reflection for those who sailed with him. The initial shock of battle and the terror of the storm slowly gave way to a profound sense of loss, and the dawning realization of the magnitude of their victory and its cost. The silent cask below deck was a constant, poignant reminder of the man who had led them, whose genius had secured their triumph, and whose life had been given in its achievement. It was a journey of mourning, a slow, watery procession carrying a legend home. Upon the arrival of HMS Victory in England, the news of Nelson's death, coupled with the triumph at Trafalgar, plunged the nation into a profound collective grief. The victory was immense, securing British naval supremacy for a century, but the cost felt equally immense with the loss of its greatest naval hero. A palpable sense of sorrow settled over the country, a deep mourning that transcended social strata. From the highest echelons of government to the humblest homes, Nelson was lamented. Preparations for a state funeral, an honour reserved for the most revered figures, began immediately. The scale of the event was intended to be unprecedented, a testament to the nation's gratitude and sorrow. His body was first taken to Greenwich, where it lay in state at the Royal Hospital. For 3 days, thousands upon thousands of ordinary citizens filed past the coffin, many waiting for hours in the cold January air, eager to pay their last respects to the man who had become a symbol of British defiance and courage. The quiet shuffling of feet, the hushed whispers, and the solemn faces created an atmosphere of deep personal loss for a figure many had never met, yet felt they knew intimately. On January 9th, 1806, the funeral procession began its slow, majestic journey from Greenwich to St. Paul's Cathedral in London. It was a spectacle of sombre grandeur, meticulously planned to convey the nation's reverence. A long line of carriages, military detachments, and civic dignitaries moved through the city streets. The hearse, an elaborate creation, was designed to resemble a ship, a fitting tribute to the Admiral. The streets of London were thronged with an estimated 500,000 people, a vast multitude silent in their grief. Windows and rooftops were filled with onlookers, all bearing witness to this historic moment. The muffled drums, the slow march, and the solemn tolling of bells created a powerful, evocative soundscape for the procession. Finally, the procession arrived at St. Paul's Cathedral, where a grand service awaited. Inside the vast dome, illuminated by flickering candles, the coffin was carried to its final resting place in the crypt. Amidst prayers and eulogies, Horatio Nelson was interred in a sarcophagus originally intended for Cardinal Wolsey, beneath the very centre of the cathedral. It was a final, fitting tribute, placing him at the heart of the nation he had served so devotedly, marking an end to his extraordinary life and the beginning of his enduring legend. With Nelson's death, the precarious support structure that had sustained Emma Hamilton's position began to crumble. Despite Nelson's fervent wishes expressed in his last will, that Emma and their daughter Horatio be provided for by the nation, his pleas were largely disregarded by the British government. The public, while grieving Nelson, held a complex and often censorious view of Emma, seeing her as an unsuitable companion for a national hero. Her unconventional past and the scandalous nature of her relationship with Nelson, particularly given his marital status, overshadowed any sympathy for her plight. The annuity Nelson had left her proved insufficient to cover her lavish lifestyle and the considerable debt she had accumulated, often on his behalf or to maintain the expensive establishments they had shared. Without Nelson's protective presence and influence, Emma found herself increasingly isolated and vulnerable. Her creditors, no longer held at bay by the Admiral's reputation, pressed their claims relentlessly. The once celebrated beauty, a darling of society in Naples and a muse to artists, gradually descended into financial ruin. Her attempts to secure a pension from the government, citing her service to the Crown during the Neapolitan campaigns and her close association with Nelson, proved futile. The establishment was unwilling to acknowledge her claims, effectively distancing itself from the scandal that had shadowed Nelson's later years. Emma's health also began to deteriorate, exacerbated by stress and a growing reliance on alcohol. By 1813, her financial situation had become so dire that she was imprisoned for debt. After her release, she fled to Calais, France, seeking to escape her creditors and find a measure of peace. she lived there in increasingly impoverished circumstances, were accompanied by her daughter, Horatio. Emma Hamilton, the woman who had captivated a hero and moved in the higher circles, died in Calais in January 1815, a decade after Nelson, in obscurity and poverty, her vibrant life ending in quiet tragedy. Horatio, Nelson's only child, was left an orphan at the age of 14. Despite the challenges of her early life and the shadow of her parents' controversial relationship, she was eventually taken in by Nelson's sisters. She grew up to be a respectable and well-adjusted woman, marrying a clergyman, Philip Ward, and raising a large family of 10 children. Horatio carried her father's legacy in her veins, though she lived a life far removed from the public gaze and the naval glories that defined him, providing a quiet, enduring link to the man who'd become a legend. The Battle of Trafalgar, fought on October 21st, 1805, represented a decisive turning point in the Napoleonic Wars, specifically in the naval struggle between Britain and France. While Nelson's life ended on that day, the consequences of his final victory resonated for a century and beyond, fundamentally reshaping global power dynamics. Prior to Trafalgar, Napoleon Bonaparte harboured ambitions of invading Britain. His strategy hinged on gaining temporary control of the English Channel, a narrow strip of water that separated his vast army from the British Isles. For years, the combined French and Spanish fleets had attempted to break the British blockade and lure the Royal Navy into a position where it could be defeated or evaded, thereby clearing the way for an invasion flotilla. Trafalgar shattered this dream irrevocably. With the annihilation of a significant portion of the combined fleet, Napoleon's naval power was effectively crippled. The sheer scale of the British victory, which saw 27 French and Spanish ships captured or destroyed without the loss of a single British vessel, rendered any further large-scale invasion plans against Britain impossible. The immediate threat to British soil was removed, and with it, the pervasive fear of a French landing that had gripped the nation for years. This victory solidified Britain's position as the undisputed naval superpower. The Royal Navy, already formidable, now commanded the seas with an authority that would largely go unchallenged for the next 100 years. This supremacy was not merely about defence, it was the bedrock of Britain's expanding global empire and its commercial prosperity. The control of the oceans allowed Britain to protect its trade routes, project power across continents, and maintain its colonial possessions without significant maritime challenge from European rivals. Furthermore, Trafalgar freed Britain's resources to focus on the land war against Napoleon. Knowing that its homeland was secure from invasion, the British government could direct its military and financial strength towards supporting continental allies and engaging French forces in other theatres. The battle did not end the Napoleonic Wars, which would continue for another decade, but it profoundly altered their character, ensuring that the conflict would be fought primarily on land, far from British shores. Nelson's final act secured Britain's insular safety and cemented its destiny as a global maritime empire. Yet Horatio Nelson's death at Trafalgar, rather than diminishing his stature, cemented his place as Britain's preeminent national hero, a position he has held with remarkable consistency for over 2 centuries. His passing, coinciding with the most decisive naval victory in British history, elevated him from a celebrated admiral to an almost mythical figure, embodying the nation's courage, determination, and maritime prowess. Almost immediately, a cult of personality formed around Nelson. His image, often depicted with his missing arm and eye, became ubiquitous. Prints, paintings, and commemorative artifacts flooded the market, ensuring his likeness was ingrained in the public consciousness. He was portrayed not just as a brilliant strategist, but as a fearless leader who placed duty above all else, yet a perception that deeply resonated with the British people during a period of protracted conflict. His famous signal before Trafalgar, "England expects that every man will do his duty," transcended its original context to become a timeless motto, encapsulating a core British value. This phrase, simple yet profound, served as a rallying cry and an enduring reminder of individual responsibility towards the collective good. It became part of the national lexicon, invoked in times of crisis, and celebrated as an expression of patriotic resolve. Nelson's influence extended deeply into the very identity of Britain, particularly its self-perception as a naval power. He became the personification of the Royal Navy's spirit and its crucial role in protecting the island nation. His victories, achieved against formidable odds, instilled a sense of invincibility and pride in British naval capabilities. This legacy fostered a strong maritime tradition and an enduring respect for those who served at sea. Monuments to Nelson were erected across the country, the most prominent being Nelson's Column in Trafalgar Square, London, which became a focal point for national celebrations and remembrance. These physical tributes served as constant reminders of his sacrifice and his contribution to national security and global standing. His life story, with its dramatic arc of triumph and personal struggle, offered a compelling narrative of heroism that continued to inspire generations. Even as historical perspectives evolve, Nelson's status as a foundational figure in British history remains largely unchallenged. He continues to be studied in naval academies, celebrated in popular culture, and remembered as the admiral who secured Britain's place on the world stage, leaving an indelible mark on the nation's identity that endures to this day. The profound impact of Horatio Nelson's life and death is perhaps most visibly manifest in the numerous monuments and memorials erected in his honour across Britain and beyond. These structures, varying in scale and design, serve as enduring testaments to his revered status, ensuring that his memory remained woven into the fabric of national consciousness. Among these many tributes, Nelson's Column in Trafalgar Square, London, stands as the most iconic and symbolically significant. Conceived in the immediate aftermath of his death, the monument was designed to be a grand and lasting tribute to the admiral who'd secured Britain's naval supremacy. Construction began in 1840, several decades after the Battle of Trafalgar, reflecting the sustained national reverence for Nelson. The column itself is a monumental structure, rising over 169 feet from the ground. At its apex, a colossal statue of Nelson, carved from Craigleith sandstone, gazes southwards towards the Thames and the sea, his one good eye symbolically surveying the waters he once commanded. His posture is resolute, a silent sentinel over the bustling square below. The statue stands atop a fluted Corinthian column, reminiscent of classical architecture, which itself rests upon a massive granite pedestal. The pedestal is adorned with 4 bronze relief panels, cast from captured French cannon. These reliefs depict scenes from Nelson's most celebrated victories: the Battle of Cape St. Vincent, the Battle of the Nile, the Battle of Copenhagen, and his death at the Battle of Trafalgar. Each panel offers a quiet, sculpted narrative of his military genius and personal courage, allowing passers-by to reflect upon the pivotal moments of his career. At the base of the column, 4 majestic bronze lions, sculpted by Sir Edwin Landseer, guard the monument, adding to its imposing presence. These lions, often a subject of admiration and recreation, symbolise Britain's strength and imperial reach, further intertwining Nelson's legacy with the nation's power. Trafalgar Square itself, named after Nelson's final decisive victory, became a civic heart of London, a place for public gathering, celebration, and protest. Nelson's Column, therefore, is not merely a statue. It is a central landmark that grounds the city in its naval history and imperial past. It represents a continuous link to a defining moment in British history, a visible embodiment of the gratitude and admiration felt for a man whose life and death irrevocably shaped the nation. It stands as a silent, powerful reminder of a hero whose spirit continues to resonate through the centuries. Beyond the grand stone of his monuments, Horatio Nelson's presence permeates the broader tapestry of popular culture and historical memory. His story told and retold through various mediums, each shaping the collective understanding of his life and achievements. From the earliest days following his death, Nelson became a figure ripe for artistic interpretation and narrative exploration. In literature, Nelson's image has been a recurring motif. Early biographies, often hagiographic in tone, cemented his heroic status, presenting a figure of unwavering courage and patriotism. Robert Southey's Life of Nelson, published in 1813, became a foundational text, shaping public perception for generations with its eloquent prose and romanticized portrayal. Later authors have explored more nuanced aspects of his character, delving into his personal complexities, his ambition, and the human cost of his relentless pursuit of victory. Historical fiction in particular has found fertile ground in Nelson's life, with authors reimagining his battles, his relationships, and the political landscape of his era, bringing his world to life for new audiences. In the realm of art, Nelson's image is ubiquitous. Countless paintings, prints, and sculptures depict him in various heroic stances, from commanding his fleet to receiving his mortal wound. These artistic representations, often commissioned or widely disseminated, played a crucial role in disseminating his legend, ensuring his face and deeds were instantly recognizable to the British public. The visual language of these works contributed significantly to the heroic narrative, emphasizing his iconic gestures, his uniform, and the dramatic sweep of naval warfare. Popular culture has also embraced Nelson, albeit sometimes in more informal ways. His famous signal, "England expects that every man will do his duty," has transcended its original context to become a widely recognized idiom, invoked in various situations requiring diligence and commitment. His name has been given to ships, pubs, and streets, embedding his legacy into the everyday geography of the nation. Even in modern times, his story continues to be adapted for film and television, with each new interpretation offering a contemporary lens through which to view his extraordinary life. Through these diverse expressions in literature, art, and popular culture, Nelson's story has been continuously reinterpreted and reaffirmed. These retellings contribute to a living historical memory, where the details of his life are selectively emphasized, debated, and re-evaluated, ensuring that the legacy of Britain's greatest naval hero remains a dynamic and enduring presence in the national imagination. While Horatio Nelson has long been celebrated as an almost mythical figure, a more nuanced and critical lens has emerged in modern reassessments of his life and actions. Contemporary historians and commentators strive for a balanced view. We are acknowledging his military brilliance while also confronting the less comfortable aspects of his character and the historical context in which he operated. One area of scrutiny concerns his personal life, particularly his public affair with Lady Emma Hamilton. While often romanticised in earlier accounts, modern perspectives consider the societal impact of such a relationship, its effect on his wife, Fanny, and the extent to which it may have compromised his professional standing or judgment at certain points. The scandal, though largely overshadowed by his later military triumphs, offers insight into the complexities of human relationships within a rigid social structure. Furthermore, some of Nelson's actions, viewed through a modern ethical framework, have drawn critical attention. His role in the suppression of the Neapolitan rebellion in 1799, particularly the execution of Francesco Caracciolo and other Neapolitan republicans, remains a contentious point. Critics argue that his actions were unduly severe, driven by a desire to restore monarchical order, and perhaps influenced by Emma Hamilton's fervent royalist sympathies. This episode challenges the image of an unblemished hero, revealing a figure capable of harsh political judgment and uncompromising resolve. The broader context of the British Empire, which Nelson so effectively served and expanded, also informs contemporary critiques. Nelson's victories solidified Britain's naval supremacy, enabling the growth and maintenance of a global empire that, from a modern standpoint, involved colonial exploitation and the imposition of British power on other nations. While Nelson himself was not directly involved in the administration of colonies, his military achievements were instrumental in creating the conditions for imperial expansion. Acknowledging this connection allows for a more comprehensive understanding of the historical consequences of his actions. These critical perspectives do not necessarily diminish Nelson's achievements as a naval commander or his profound impact on British history. Instead, they encourage a more layered understanding of a complex historical figure, one who was both a product of his time and a shaper of it. By examining his life with both admiration and critical detachment, a richer, more human portrait of Horatio Nelson emerges, reflecting the evolving nature of historical inquiry itself. The long journey through the life of Horatio Nelson concludes, leaving behind the quiet echoes of a remarkable existence. From his humble Norfolk beginnings to the thunderous climax at Trafalgar, his path was one defined by an unwavering dedication to his calling. It was a life lived largely at sea, under the vast, indifferent sky, shaped by the rhythm of waves and the constant readiness for conflict. Nelson's story, in its essence, is a profound exploration of duty. His oft-quoted signal before Trafalgar, "England expects that every man will do his duty," was not merely a rallying cry, but a distillation of his own guiding principle. He embodied a sense of service that transcended personal comfort, pushing him through injury, illness, and the relentless pressures of command. This commitment, at times absolute, continues to resonate, even as the specific contexts of his era recede into history. Her courage, too, stands as a central pillar of his legacy. It was not merely the absence of fear, but the ability to act decisively and innovatively in the face of immense danger. His unconventional tactics, his willingness to risk all for a decisive victory, and his personal exposure to enemy fire speak to a profound bravery that inspired those who served under him and captivated the nation he served. This aspect of his character remains a powerful, if sometimes daunting, example. And then there is the inescapable element of sacrifice. Nelson gave much, enduring physical pain, personal loss, and ultimately his life, for what he believed was the greater good of his country. His death at the moment of his greatest triumph cemented his place in the national consciousness, and transforming him from a brilliant admiral into a symbol of ultimate devotion. The quiet end to his life on the deck of the Victory, surrounded by the sounds of battle and the knowledge of success, offers a poignant reflection on the costs of greatness. The legacy of Horatio Nelson, therefore, is not a static monument, but a living narrative, continually reinterpreted and understood through the lens of changing times. He remains a figure of immense historical significance, a testament to what one individual, driven by conviction and extraordinary talent, can achieve. As the final whispers of his story settle, one is left to contemplate the enduring power of a life lived with such intensity, its echoes still drifting across the silent seas of history.